and probably frosty start for many areas. Could see some mist and fog developing by the morning as well, particularly across the south and east. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. So it will be a cold start to the day tomorrow. We'll likely see a frost for many inland areas of England and Wales. Further north and west, though, we do see a change overnight as a band of wet weather arrives through the night. That'll bring some blustery rain to parts of northwestern Scotland through tomorrow morning, potentially some snow over the high ground as well. And that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales to bring a wetter afternoon here tomorrow. Ahead of that, though, across many central and southern areas of England, it should stay dry through much of the day, but still feeling fairly cold. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures, endless red tape. As Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain, they've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
Affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Monday, the 26th of February.
Lee Anderson fights back. The Islamophobia row at the heart of the Conservative Party hots up as the party's former deputy chairman releases a statement defending himself and attacking Sadiq Khan's record.
And these are live pictures of a blockade in Brussels. Chaos has erupted in the European capital as farmers breach police cordons and storm the city centre in protest of EU farming policy.
And Generation Sick note, people in their 20s are more likely to be out of work due to ill health than those in their 40s. A study finds young people claim a mental disorder more than any other age group. Why is that?
Well, this Islamophobia row is a fascinating row from many different angles, mainly because there's this equivalence that many people are trying to draw between the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and the alleged Islamophobia of the Conservative Party. But there's a big problem in all of this, and that's the word Islamophobia.
Yeah, the word Islamophobia. Now, we've had this debate before. Years ago, we were discussing the definition of Islamophobia, and the concerns were that using the word Islamophobia instead of, say, anti-Muslim hatred would mean that essentially you're not allowed to say anything negative about the religion of Islam, and that is absolutely ridiculous. You should be able to criticise any religion, Christianity, Judaism,
Zoroastrianism,
Buddhism, Hinduism.
Scientologists.
You should be able to. There shouldn't be special treatment for one religion. That's very different from anti-Muslim hatred, which is going after individuals simply because they are Muslim. So
exactly.
There you go.
There's a difference between attacking individuals and attacking ideas. And one of the risks here is if we use the term Islamophobia, are we introducing, through the back door, some sort of new blasphemy code in the way that we speak? If we can't criticise ideas, philosophy, religions, if we can't do that, have we reintroduced blasphemy laws to the United Kingdom? We want to hear your views. gbviews@gbnews.com is the address to get in touch with.
Yes, should we ditch the term Islamophobia in favour of anti-Muslim hatred? Let us know. Let's get to the headlines with Sophia.
Thanks, Emily. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 12. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Top story this hour. Lee Anderson has accused the Mayor of London of having double standards for political benefit in his handling of pro-Palestinian marches, as a row over comments he made on GB News deepens. The former Tory deputy chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. He said that while some people found his comments divisive, politics is divisive, and his intention was to point out what he called failures by Sadiq Khan. The Prime Minister described the remarks as unacceptable and wrong, while the London Mayor said he was pouring fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred. The North and the Midlands are to receive billions of pounds worth of investment in public transport as the government outlines plans to redirect funds from the cancelled northern leg of the HS2 rail project. It's understood the money will be used to expand mass transit systems, refurbish rail and bus stations and repair potholes. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds, though it's not expected to be made available until April next year, months after the next general election. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the government is empowering local communities.
2.5 billion for the North, 2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of Parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
The Transport Secretary Mark Harper speaking there. Now, the housing regulator warns that significant intervention is required after persistent shortfalls in the number of new homes being built. The Competition and Markets Authority says complex and unpredictable planning rules across the UK are partly to blame for new home targets being missed. It's also raising concerns over the quality of new build housing, with developers often focusing on price rather than the needs of a particular area. And there'll be an investigation after evidence was found suggesting that 8 house builders may be sharing commercially sensitive information. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He's expected to unveil a plan to run a so-called patriotic economy, which he says would include boosting home ownership and establishing the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described the plan as empty, but Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, told GB News, she says, it's the change Britain's economy needs.
Kind of expectations that people in our country used to have, that their kids would be better off than they were, that they'd have at least a slightly better quality of life. All of those dreams are just completely out of reach for very many people in our country. And Keir Starmer is absolutely determined to change that for the future, getting Britain building, actually making sure we have those good jobs up and down the country, reforming the planning system. The many changes that he's setting out today would make that big difference to British people.
In other news, there are angry scenes on the streets of Brussels this morning as farmers set fire to piles of tyres. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as more than 100 tractors parked around EU buildings as ministers arrived for meetings. They're demanding action from the European Union amid growing fury over free trade agreements. They say it's led to cheap supermarket prices, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some aspects of its Green Deal. And young people are more likely to be off work due to ill health than those in their 40s. That's according to a new report. The Resolution Foundation says it's radically different from the past, when work absences tended to increase with age. It cited a rise in mental health struggles among young people as a possible factor, with 34% of young people aged 18 to 24 reporting struggles in 2022. That's compared to just 24% in the year 2000. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
It's 7 minutes past 12 and Lee Anderson has come out fighting, releasing a new statement exclusively to GB News following his suspension from the Conservative Party.
The statement, written on Saturday, is what he would have said had the Tory party not demanded a personal apology to Sadiq Khan for his comments. Let's remind ourselves of the offending remarks made on GB News on Friday.
I don't actually believe that these Islamists have got control of our country, but what I do believe is they've got control of Khan, and they've got control of London, and they've got control of Starmer as well. And we've seen the shocking scenes played out in Parliament just a few nights back where Starmer crumbled. He put pressure on the Speaker to alter the rules, if you like, for the nature of the debate and the ultimate voting. And this is a result of weak leadership.
It's interesting, isn't it, there, that he says that the Islamists have control of Keir Starmer?
Yeah, he said Khan, London and Starmer. Although all of the conversation around this is only focused on Sadiq Khan, although that was 1/3 of the things he said.
Well, in his newly released statement, Lee Anderson has written, I made some comments yesterday that some people thought were divisive. Politics is divisive, and I'm just incredibly frustrated about the abject failures of the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan.
He continued, Khan called for an immediate ceasefire weeks ago with no conditions while the hostages were still being held at gunpoint by a terrorist organisation. Hundreds of people had been arrested for racist abuse on these marches, and we barely hear a peep from the mayor. If these marches were about something less fashionable, Sadiq Khan would have been the first to call for them to be cancelled.
He goes on, it's double standards for political benefit. Sadiq Khan is failing London across the board on transport with ULEZ and the strikes which he pledged to end, on knife crime and violence against women and girls. The list is endless.
Well, that statement has now been released, but of course Lee Anderson wanted to release it on Saturday. What has been the hold-up? Let's join now our political editor Christopher Hope with all the details. Christopher, why has Lee Anderson only just released this statement today now to GB News and not on Saturday?
Well, hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. That's right. This statement was drafted by Lee Anderson on Saturday morning after the row about those remarks to GB News on Friday night. Now, the statement from Lee Anderson didn't go as far as CCHQ wanted it to go. They wanted an apology to Sadiq Khan, and Lee Anderson is refusing to do so. He's taking issue with the way that the police are policing protests. He says there's a double standard in that there's not enough people being arrested for anti-Jewish, anti-Israel remarks, and he's saying there's a double standard there. Of course, Sadiq Khan is notionally in control of the Met Police Force in London. He's told us today, Lee Anderson has told GB News today, if you are wrong, apologising is not a sign of weakness but a sign of strength. But when you think you're right, as Lee Anderson does, you should never apologise, because to do so will be a sign of weakness. So there's essentially a face-off between Lee Anderson, now an independent MP, no longer a Tory MP, and Sadiq Khan, who's London Mayor. I should say London Mayor has written in the Standard, and we're expecting to see that full statement dropping today. That's the London Evening Standard at 12:30 today. But a bit of it has appeared already on the Standard's website. I'll read it out to you now. In the Standard, the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, says, "We are facing some very difficult times with the politics of extremism, division and blame becoming more mainstream. But I remain hopeful because I know that the decent majority in our city and country believe in our British values of equality, openness and respect for diversity." He goes on, "That's why I'm confident that working together we'll be able to stamp out anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, stop the march of hard-right populism and show that hope, unity and love will always trump fear, division and hatred."
Interesting. Now, of course, a lot was made over the weekend of Lee Anderson's comments, in particular relating to the Mayor of London, accusations that they were racist, Islamophobic and bigoted. But of course, he did say that Islamists are in control of Keir Starmer as well. Not too many people seem to note that.
Yes, I mean, Lee Anderson is making very clear he is not a racist, he tells us. He's not anti-Muslim. He has many Muslim friends. He's got this problem, he thinks, by the way that these marches are being policed. It's showing too much deference to people making dreadful remarks and statements about Israel and about the Jewish people. And it was really triggered for him by that, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. The idea that Israel could be swept away, an attack on the Israeli state and Jewish people here, and that was projected onto the Elizabeth Tower where Big Ben is housed on Wednesday night. So it all goes back to then, and that's his concern.
And yet, those same protests have targeted many Labour politicians. Is it really credible for the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party to say that Keir Starmer is controlled by Islamists when Keir Starmer seems to be hounded by Islamists on an almost day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I think that is definitely less credible about Sir Keir Starmer. I don't really quite follow the argument there. I can see why he's saying it about the London Mayor. The London Mayor would definitely disagree with it, but he's saying it because he is seeing double standards in the policing of these protests. And he says the line, "The buck stops with the Mayor of London," and that's why he's saying it. And of course,
although Chris, the Metropolitan Police are operationally independent. Whilst the Mayor of London acts as the sort of police and crime commissioner, they're accountable to him. He can't determine how they police, can he?
No, they can't. And that's a point, actually, which I took up on air with Lee Anderson on Friday. In that long interview with Martin Daubney, he did say there very clearly he thought the government should take over policing in the capital. And I said, well, this can't happen, Lee, because we live in a country where we have MPs like yourself, Lee Anderson, who make these laws, but it's up to the police to enforce them. So there's choices being made on the ground by police, and if they're ignoring the law which says you can't project a message onto the Parliament, that's a matter for the police. But we do have these new policing and crime commissioners across the England and Wales, and that's the role which Sadiq Khan has. So I think it is legitimate to ask Sadiq Khan why he's not speaking out more about the policing. But as you say, Tom and Emily, correctly, that they can't make these choices on the ground for the police.
No, that's a really important distinction to make. Of course, the Mayor of London can sort of make these calls and make pronouncements, but he can't directly control what the police do. But that's Christopher Hope, thank you very much for talking us through that developing story and that new exclusive statement.
Well, joining us now is Conservative MP for Crawley, Henry Smith. Henry, thank you very much for joining us. Of course, the weekend's news has been dominated by Lee Anderson's comments and the subsequent withdrawal of the whip from him. We've now heard a longer statement from Lee Anderson. What are your thoughts? Do you believe it's right that Rishi Sunak took this tough stance with him?
Well, I wouldn't have used the words that Lee Anderson used the other day. I certainly think, though, that the London Mayor Sadiq Khan and the Labour leader Keir Starmer are guilty of being incompetent and inconsistent. And I think really what the row over the weekend has been is reflecting the fact that we do have this growing divisiveness in our politics, and MPs and other politicians who are afraid to take actions because they worry about the consequences of being lobbied principally by Muslim constituents. So there is an issue. We saw that last Wednesday in the House of Commons, where the Speaker broke precedent, changed standing orders because he was lent upon by the Labour leader. That's their sort of modus operandi, and they did that because they didn't want Labour members of Parliament to be put in a difficult position with their constituents.
Isn't the problem, Henry, that we were having a discussion about that very, very important issue of MP safety and potentially our democracy being very much impacted by threats to MPs. And then Lee Anderson goes on the television, makes these comments, and then the whole conversation, the whole public debate is now on whether the Conservative Party is Islamophobic or not.
Well, I think there's a lot of inconsistency here. I've heard many Labour MPs make what I would describe as unacceptable comments. They're free to make them. Free speech is very important, but there does seem to be a double standard when it comes to how some Conservative MPs are treated when they make comments that are controversial, but nevertheless are legitimate free speech. And the way that some Labour politicians and members of Parliament are treated, like Sadiq Khan and other members of Parliament. For example, with regard to the Rotherham grooming gang case, where one Labour MP said that those who were seeking to highlight that case should shut up for the sake of diversity.
I think that might have been a tweet that was retracted after it was sent. We should make that clear. But, Henry, I do want to ask your question on the issue of Keir Starmer, because in the clip that we heard, the original comments, Lee Anderson said the Islamists have control of Khan, they have control of Starmer. And yet every single headline in every single newspaper has been only about one of the two gentlemen that were mentioned there. Why do you think that was?
Well, I can only speculate as to why newspaper editors focus on one part of a story and not another. I think part of it might be the fact that Sadiq Khan is, of course, Muslim himself, and therefore perhaps that is why he has been more of a focus. I think another factor has been that Keir Starmer has kept very quiet, actually, around this issue because he fears to get involved in controversial issues. He runs away from those, whereas Sadiq Khan has chosen to really challenge Lee Anderson's comments head on. So I suspect that's the reason why. But it's very important, I think, that there is a focus on the Labour leader, because in the last week, less than the last week, this is a man who has effectively bullied the Speaker of the House of Commons into changing standing orders to try and dodge a very difficult vote for his members of Parliament. And if that is somebody who aspires to be Prime Minister, if that's the way that they operate, then there should be alarm bells ringing across the country, not just London.
Henry, just very quickly, do you think that Lee Anderson will get the whip back?
Look, I've never been in the whip's office, so I don't know the process, but I suspect the whip will be restored. Lee's somebody who is very forthright in the way that he expresses himself, and I think there's nothing wrong with being forthright in our politics. I'm a big fan of introducing something like the US First Amendment to our politics, because and to everyone's right of free speech, because unless there's challenge, unless we hear things that we find uncomfortable, then free speech dies and democratic choice dies, and that would be extremely dangerous for our country and our future.
Well, thank you very much indeed for your time. Henry Smith, Conservative MP for Crawley.
Well, joining us now is the senior political commentator for GB News, Nigel Nelson. Nigel, what do you make of what Henry Smith had to say there, that he's expecting that the whip will be given back to Lee Anderson in the fullness of time?
Yeah, I'd be a bit surprised about that because the Prime Minister this morning has gone even further than his deputy Oliver Dowden yesterday by saying that Lee Anderson's comments were wrong, that they shouldn't have been made, and that's why the whip was withdrawn. Oliver Dowden yesterday was saying that had Lee apologised, the whip wouldn't have been taken away. Well, the Prime Minister's gone further than that. So even now, should Lee apologise for his comments, and we can see he's shown no sign of doing so, that still wouldn't get the whip back. So at the moment, it looks like Lee won't be the Conservative candidate for Ashfield at the election.
That's a significant issue, and I suppose it really does rely on what the intent behind Lee Anderson's comments were and whether or not he's completely implacably opposed to apologising for any element of them. The interesting point here, perhaps, is that it wasn't just Khan that he was talking about. It was the whole of the Labour Party. It was Sir Keir Starmer as well, and yet the conversation has only focused on Sadiq Khan. Might that be a mitigating factor for Lee Anderson? Even if what he was saying was probably rather outlandish, it's unlikely the entire Labour Party's in the grip of Islamists. I think that's probably a very silly thing to say. But given that he said it not just about Sadiq Khan, he said it about Sir Keir Starmer, who's a man with no Muslim background and with no faith. Does that not suggest that perhaps he wasn't targeting Muslims?
Well, I mean, the mere fact he mentioned Starmer, and that hasn't been highlighted, as you say, I found a bit odd as well, Tom. The other point here is, bear in mind that Suella Braverman made very similar comments, and they were actually aimed at Keir Starmer in a Daily Telegraph article last week. And what she accused the Labour leader of being, as she put it, in hock to Islamists. Now, what is weird here is that Lee makes similar comments. Suella Braverman retains the whip for saying something which is pretty identical. So, certain amount of double standards here in the Tory party.
Yes, it does appear that way. And we've got Richard Tice from Reform Party saying that their support has surged as a result of Lee Anderson having the whip withdrawn.
Well, I mean, Nigel Farage has suggested that Lee Anderson actually joins the Reform Party. That's obviously a matter for him. If he's not likely to be a Conservative candidate at the next election, he might well do so. I'd imagine Lee Anderson will feel more at home with Reform than he does with the Conservatives.
Interesting points. Well, Nigel Nelson, thank you very much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Really appreciate it.
Yes, well, coming up, Generation Sick Note. So get this, young people are increasingly blaming mental health issues for not being at work. Is that fair enough, or is it another example of snowflakery?
Flakery, great word.
Flakery. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it?
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public would now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 12:26. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a shocking new report says young people are increasingly blaming mental health problems for being jobless, with the number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues more than doubling just in the past decade, rising from 93,000 to 190,000.
Well, 2/3 report suffering poor mental health, and 4 in 10 list it as their main reason for not working.
That's shocking.
But we're asking, do young people just need to get on with it?
To the point, as always. Let's pose that question to wellbeing expert and founder of the Mind Tribe, Angie McGrandles. Angie, thank you very much for joining us. Now, a lot of older people, I would guess, looking at these statistics and seeing that, 4 in 10 young people have some kind of 4 in 10 list mental health as the main reason for them not working. They'll look at that and think, oh, come on, just get on with it. Go to work. That will help with your mental health. Back in the day, we didn't worry about this. What do you say?
Well, as the report has shown, young people now have the poorest mental health of any age group. And this is a reversal from 2 decades ago. And I think COVID will have definitely impacted this age group. This age group in particular will have gaps in their education, in their skill sets. The way they will have studied during this period would have impacted their social skills as well. And I think it's fair to say that we live in an always-on culture. This is a generation that's always plugged in from a tech perspective as well, from the moment they wake up to the point that they go to bed. You know, their brain is absorbing information at such a fast, high state. And having this constant stimulation, this constant connectivity, can affect the balance of the neurotransmitters in our brain, such as dopamine and adrenaline. And these neurotransmitters play a role in regulating our mood, our attention and arousal levels, and excessive stimulation, particularly from digital sources, can lead to deregulation of these neurotransmitters. And that impacts our mental health, our general well-being. So while, you know, older generations can say get back into work, I think there are a number of things that have played a role in why this 18 to 24 age group in particular is reported as having higher poor mental health than ever.
But this is all self-reported, of course, and perhaps that gets to the nub of one of these issues. I mean, it could be that there is a lot more issue with young people's mental health, or it could be that they're just more aware of it and perhaps to some extent hyper-aware of it, maybe over-aware of it. Because if we look at the hard data, the really quite sad data of suicides in this country, it's not young people that are suffering the most, it's middle-aged men.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we are more acutely aware of mental health than ever before. The conversation around mental health is more open, it's growing. Again, this is due to COVID. COVID has definitely stimulated that conversation. From a workplace perspective, there are more and more employers looking to support their staff with access to tools, training, counselling, etc. So, you know, the conversation around mental health is there, but as you said, it's how it's measured and, you know, how you categorise certain kinds of mental health. So,
Angie, do we risk, sorry to interrupt because we don't have long, but do we risk sometimes over-diagnosing? Because we see so many statistics about how many young people are on drugs for depression, anxiety, other mental disorders that they may be suffering. Do sometimes we over-diagnose when actually there could be other ways of helping people with their mental health? I mean, there are so many tools available to young people when it comes to improving their mental health. What's stopping them?
Well, I think when it comes to mental health, and if you think from a medical perspective, the resources that are available to young people, well, to anybody really, is dependent on your GP, where you live, the waiting times. So I think sometimes GPs are guilty of prescribing medication when there are other things that we can do, other tools that we can try. But again, this is down to where you live, the waiting times, the type of GP you have. You know,
yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a bit of a postcode lottery, isn't it? But thank you so much. Sorry to have to leave it there. Angie McGrandles, who is the founder of the Mind Tribe and a wellbeing expert. Great to speak to you.
Well, coming up, we'll be live in Brussels as European farmers continue their protests ahead of crunch talks. These are the live pictures, scenes from Brussels right now. Police cordons being erected across the city and indeed water cannon being prepared for use.
Looks like there's some smoke or something in the air there. I'm not sure what that's caused by. Oh, gosh.
Yes. So we'll be having more of these pictures throughout the afternoon and asking the question, could we be seeing scenes like this in the UK very soon? All that to come after your news headlines.
Thanks, Tom. It's 12:32. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. Lee Anderson has accused the Mayor of London of having double standards for political benefit in his handling of pro-Palestinian marches as a row over comments he made on GB News deepens. The former Tory deputy chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Sadiq Khan said he was pouring fuel on the fire of anti-Muslim hatred, while the Prime Minister described the comments as unacceptable and wrong. But Reform Party leader Richard Tice said Mr Anderson speaks for millions of people who are appalled by pro-Palestinian protests, accusing the London mayor of allowing what he called pro-Hamas hate-filled marches. In other news, the Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds, but the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. The housing regulator warns that significant intervention is required after persistent shortfalls in the number of new homes being built. The Competition and Markets Authority says complex and unpredictable planning rules across the UK are partly to blame for new build targets being missed. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He's expected to unveil a plan to run a so-called patriotic economy, which he says would include boosting home ownership and establishing the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described Labour's plan as empty, promising to stick with the government's plan, which he says is working. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show. Sunday mornings from 9:30.
We had Grant Shapps on last week. He was talking about how defence spending is now creeping up to 2.25% of GDP. Ben Wallace's predecessor suggested it should be 3%. We hear that we've got the smallest army, I think, since the Napoleonic Wars. Numbers are down. There's a question as to whether we can staff frigates in the Red Sea. Why haven't we sent aircraft carriers? What's your impression of the situation?
Well, I don't think it matters how much you spend, it's how effectively you spend it. And we spend it very ineffectively. We have lots of scandals about defence spending. And I think partly because of the monopoly position of some of our defence suppliers, we don't get good value and we don't get reliability. This latest story in the Telegraph is that HMS Diamond, which is our ship, which is out there defending the Red Sea, doesn't have the capability of firing a missile from the ship to the land, so it can't participate in the attacks on the Houthis. So in order that we can participate in the attacks, we're flying RAF aircraft from Cyprus, which is a very long way away. When I was Defence Secretary, I ordered cruise missiles for our nuclear-powered, but not nuclear-armed submarines. And I think we have 6 or possibly 7 of those. But last autumn, it was reported that 5 of those were out of commission, were not available. We have about 21 aggressive surface ships. So we've got 2 aircraft carriers, then we've got frigates, and we've got destroyers. But at any one time, you can count on about half of those not being available because they're under refit or whatever. So we have a minimal surface fleet now. And for whatever reason, it doesn't seem that we're able to deploy a submarine to the area that can fire cruise missiles. Our 2 aircraft carriers, built at enormous expense, are sitting in Portsmouth.
Which seems to most people ludicrous, at least with what's going on.
It doesn't seem ludicrous to me.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Some breaking news for you now. The Reform Party leader Richard Tice is accusing Sadiq Khan of losing our streets and says that Lee Anderson speaks for many.
Well, wading into the row surrounding Ashfield MP's Islamist comments about the London mayor. What he said about the London mayor anyway. Mr Tice says, many in the media have asked me about Lee Anderson's comments. The truth is that Lee speaks for millions of people who are appalled by what is happening to our country.
He continued, between them, this gutless government and the Mayor of London appear to have lost control of our streets. The projecting of a vile anti-Semitic slogan onto our Houses of Parliament last week is a shocking illustration of the breakdown of law and order. In his role as London's Police and Crime Commissioner, Sadiq Khan is responsible for London's security. Along with Sir Mark Rowley, he has totally failed in that capacity. Week in, week out, he and the police have allowed pro-Hamas, hate-filled anti-Semitic marches to continue.
I first called for these ugly demonstrations to be banned on October the 11th, having seen firsthand the awful behaviour on the first march on October the 9th. It took place before Israel had even responded to the horrors of October the 7th. Fast forward to today, and thanks to a woefully weak leadership on the part of our authorities, extreme Islamists are creating a sense of fear and intimidation in our capital. With every failure to crack down on their behaviour, they become emboldened.
Richard Tice continues to say the Jewish community is scared. Londoners are scared, MPs are scared, the Speaker is scared. Even the police appear too scared to do what they're supposed to do to maintain the peace in our capital. Arrest those who demonstrably break the law.
He goes on, Lee Anderson may have been clumsy in his precise choice of words, but his sentiments are supported by millions of British citizens, including myself, he says. Never has Westminster and the craven left-leaning establishment been so out of touch with ordinary people. I do not and will not give a running commentary on any discussions I have with any MPs, but those MPs have my number. He finishes there.
Quite a long statement, that.
Quite a long statement. Hope you kept up with it.
Well, shall we discuss it with our political editor, Christopher Hope? Christopher, basically what Richard Tice here is doing is saying Lee Anderson did nothing wrong and he's free to join the Reform Party.
That's right, Tom and Emily, you're correct in saying I read this as about a 400-word invite to Lee Anderson, now without a party, to join the Reform Party. Of course, that party had its conference on Saturday. It came across with new measures on cutting income tax. And there's no question that line at the end, which no one even asked Richard Tice about whether he's talking to Lee Anderson, but he just says out of nowhere, I do not and will not give running commentary on any discussions I have with any MPs, but they've got my number. Now, no one asked you about that, Mr. Tice. Why are you telling us?
It's an interesting question, Christopher, because ultimately many people will see what Lee Anderson said as very hurtful to particularly the Muslim community in this country. Even though he did say this of Keir Starmer, he said this of Sadiq Khan, a Muslim mayor, a moderate man, and accused him of being controlled by Islamists. Many people have seen that as something that is rooted in anti-Muslim hate.
Yeah, and that language it says here is clumsy. I mean, Lee Anderson has said something similar. Lee Anderson won't apologise to the Mayor of London. He's been very clear, saying he doesn't feel he's got anything to say sorry about. The language was clumsy on the issue of Islamists, but the point he's trying to make is a political point. Lee Anderson is saying, why is this this policing, this sort of ignoring of this language being projected onto the Parliament, not being called out by the Mayor of London, who is notionally in charge, or at least the Commissioner of Met Police answers to them, and therefore he can actually say something and isn't saying it, and that's the concern.
And the frustration is, for many of us and the public, is that we were beginning to have an important discussion about the threat of Islamist extremism on our streets and to our democracy. We were having a conversation about MPs' safety and the safety of the rest of us, and then it gets bulldozed by Lee Anderson's comments.
That's right, and he, of course, was responding to an article by Suella Braverman in The Telegraph, which said something similar, and that came, of course, after the police weren't seen to be taking a tougher line on that chanting and that projection of remarks on Wednesday. So, yeah, it's built up. And don't forget the pressure on the Speaker hasn't gone away. There's an EDM, a motion of no confidence in him. I am expecting more names to be added to that list as SNP MPs return to Parliament, many of whom apparently couldn't actually work the online system to add your name to this motion of no confidence in the Speaker. And that goes back to that debate from last Wednesday, Tom and Emily, when, of course, the Speaker allowed MPs from the Labour Party to vote on their own policy on Gaza rather than support either the Lib Dem or SNP alternatives. So this is the Lee Anderson issue is really a side issue to the big threat facing the Speaker at the moment.
This is something you don't normally hear from a politician, that we heard from Lee Anderson, saying if you are wrong, apologising is not a sign of weakness but a sign of strength. But when you think you are right, you should never apologise, because to do so would be a sign of weakness. We do a lot of the time see empty apologies from our politicians. For a lot of people in this country probably will welcome the fact that actually he said what he means what he says.
Yeah, if you go on my social media timelines, which of course is not representative of the entire country, but many people are saying that Lee Anderson, if he thinks he's right, don't apologise. What people do hate is this kind of "I'm sorry, you're upset" apology. People hate that kind of language. They want people to say one thing or the other. Lee Anderson is known for straight talking, and he's not doing anything less than that now.
But Chris, why would it be so hard for him to say, I'm sorry, Sadiq, I didn't mean you were controlled by Islamists. I meant that you're a weak man, a weak mayor who is not standing up to Islamists in the way that the Mayor of London should. That would be a very easy statement to make, which would both say, I messed up on the language there, and talking about a Muslim mayor as if he's controlled by Islamists is wrong to say, but you can very easily call the Mayor of London weak.
Yeah, I mean, he says in his statement, didn't he, Tom? My words may have been clumsy, but my words are born out of sheer frustration at what's happening to our beautiful capital city. And then he made the point, we've got to get Khan out at the elections in May. And that is the context of all these remarks. Sadiq Khan is seeking an unprecedented third term as London mayor in the mayoral elections. He's been run quite close by Susan Hall, who is a Tory candidate. Now, she's quite a weak candidate, but the way that the new system is in London now, it's a first-past-the-post system, so it might be very, very tight. I think both candidates admit that. And these kind of remarks were made before the 2016 London mayoral elections, the first time that Sadiq Khan, by both David Cameron in the House of Commons and Zach Goldsmith in an article in the Daily Mail, made remarks about claims about Sadiq Khan sharing platforms in the past with extremists. And those, at that point, Zach Goldsmith and David Cameron, they didn't lose any party whips. And certainly friends of Mr. Anderson are telling me that there's a double standard here, that it's okay for posh boys to say it, for example, in the past, but when a working class lad who says he's a Tory, says it, he loses the whip. How is that fair?
Yes, I guess he didn't substantiate it with any solid examples. But thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, our political editor there. I mean, that's a very good point. David Cameron has made links with Sadiq Khan to extremists before. Zach Goldsmith did too.
And
Were they chastised at the time? Zach Goldsmith was, I remember.
Sadiq Khan has met some of these fruity groups in the past, but that doesn't, of course, mean that he agrees with groups that he meets with. But perhaps the fault of Lee Anderson there is clumsy wording, not backing it up, as you say, with evidence. I mean, I come back to this point. Would it really be so hard to say, look, I'm sorry, I didn't mean you were controlled by Islamists. I just mean that you're a weak mayor who isn't standing up in the way that one should?
Well, interesting. Let us know what you think. gbviews@gbnews.com. But the Church of England has told its parishes to do more to tackle racial injustice, to draw up some kind of plan. I heard. We'll be digging into this later. We're discussing whether race or faith should be the church's priority, or can they do both?
Yes, because they said the priority should be standing up for this new racial policy, rather than, I don't know, praying or sort of religion or all of the gaudy things. No, it's all about race relations, apparently. But
well, there you go.
All of that to come. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Look, you're a respected royal biographer, and there are so many people who are on the sort of royal gravy train, if you will, people who are making a career out of gossip and speculation. But yours very much built on confidence and sources and facts. And you don't offer an opinion that often inside your book. But when you do, I suppose, therefore, it carries a bit more weight. So when you say that the Sussexes are easily offended and, you know, effectively pretty prickly, what do you mean, and what have you based that on?
Well, on numerous their riposte to any given situation in their books, in their TV interviews. And let's not forget, there have been a lot of TV interviews, 6-part Netflix drama, Spare. You see time and again that they feel they feel resentful. They feel that, you know, something hasn't gone their way, and that this is part of some sort of calculated campaign against them. And actually, I mean, when you've got a fast-moving story, I mean, for example, in my book, I go into those frantic hours after the death of the Queen, and everybody's trying to sort themselves out. And Harry writes in his book Spare how you know, no one will return his calls, and he can't get through to anyone, and it's sort of it's just all a bit me. And actually, the whole kind of royal machine, if you like, is a team effort. And I just think it's very sad because, you know, Harry and Meghan, they had such potential. And now when we do tend to hear from them, on a royal matter, it's just to say how miserable they were being royal. And that was, you know, they were royal for whatever it was, 600-700 days. They're post-royal now for over twice that time.
Envisage a scenario where they're back in England and they're back in royal life?
I can't envisage a situation where they're back, as it were, as part of the sort of royal working unit, but I could certainly see it becoming a kind of normal thing for them to keep.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, joining us now with the latest is our political editor, Christopher Hope, who has some breaking news for us. Christopher?
Now from Sadiq Khan, he's written in the London Evening Standard newspaper, Tom and Emily, a statement here from Sadiq Khan in an article in the London Evening Standard in response, really, to the row of the past 2 days caused by the Lee Anderson comments about this idea of this Islamist takeover of the mayoralty. He says here that more than 2 days on from Lee Anderson's vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic remarks, we have yet to hear the Prime Minister call it for what it is: Islamophobic, anti-Muslim, hate and racist. Remarkably, Rishi Sunak released a statement yesterday on hatred in politics, but failed to mention anti-Muslim statement at all. Then his deputy, Oliver Dowden, who of course was on GB News as well yesterday, repeatedly refused to accept that Anderson's remarks were racist, anti-Muslim or Islamophobic. This speaks volumes. He goes on, it shouldn't be hard to call out comments that are so unambiguously ignorant, prejudiced and racist, yet those at the top of the Tory party are stubbornly refusing to do so. It is a tacit endorsement of anti-Muslim hatred and can only lead to the conclusion that anti-Muslim bigotry and racism are not taken seriously. And just finally, racism is racism and should always be called out, whatever minority it is targeted against. There can be no hierarchy. Now, there's a much longer statement on the Standard website and in the newspaper today, but that's the feeling. I think you've got here the London Mayor trying to make it an issue about Rishi Sunak's control, his authority, and what he would say, that's Mr Khan, that there's an issue of Islamophobia in the Tory party. That, of course, is denied by the party.
That's an excoriating statement, Chris, and I suppose it puts in plain sight the position of Rishi Sunak almost standing in the middle here. He's got all the kickback from the right for suspending Lee Anderson, but because he won't say what the comments were racist, he'll only say that they were wrong, he's getting the kickback from Sadiq Khan and the Labour Party as well. It's almost as if he's standing in the middle of the road and being hit by traffic from both sides.
That's right. He's on a very delicate ledge, isn't he, Tom? So in the lobby briefing that we journalists get from the government, when we can ask them anything we like, the spokesman told this to reporters: the PM has been clear that we don't tolerate any anti-Muslim hatred in any form, and we'll combat that and any sort of discrimination of that kind, as we do in any racism, prejudice and intolerance, whenever it occurs. But they won't say whether the Anderson's comments were Islamophobic. So they're saying in general we're against it, but they won't comment on the Anderson's comments. And that is a very narrow ledge to stand on for the Tory party and Rishi Sunak this lunchtime.
It's difficult for the Conservative leadership to know what to do. So Rishi Sunak has given this statement.
Well, it shouldn't be. I mean,
Sorry, go on.
Well, you say that, Emily. I don't think it should be that difficult. If you have taken the whip away from Lee Anderson, you don't like his comments, then why not call them out for what they are, if that's what you see they are? Instead, what appears to happen is they've suspended Lee Anderson, but not willing to go any further and criticise him, and maybe because they're concerned that many on the Tory right, many red wallers, don't see a problem with what Lee Anderson said in the first place. So to go after Lee Anderson any further would inflame tensions in the party.
And perhaps they want him back, that their suspension is a couple of months in the sin bin before he's brought back in to stand again as a Conservative at the next election. I suppose they're leaving that option wide open. But for now, Christopher Hope, thank you so much for bringing us that statement from Sadiq Khan, following the statement from Richard Tice, following the statement from Lee Anderson. It's been a show of statements so far today, but the news is moving.
Well, tell us which was your favourite statement out of the above: Lee Anderson, Sadiq Khan, or Richard Tice. There you go. We'll have more reaction after this very short break. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We are Britain's election channel.
A
brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It should be staying dry for many areas through the rest of the day, with some late sunshine to come. However, it will be a cold night tonight. That's as high pressure is building in from the south and west, so that will settle things down through the rest of the night. However, in the north and west, we'll start to see some thicker cloud and rain arrive by tomorrow morning. So the winds should ease tonight, allowing for temperatures to dip down quite early on, and we should see some mist and fog developing mainly across central and southeastern areas. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. But away from any mist and fog, it will turn frosty, particularly for inland areas of Wales, England, northern England as well. Further north and west, though, we'll see some wet weather arrive by tomorrow morning. Quite a blustery band of rain will push through around rush hour for northwestern areas of Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. That could bring some snow to the high ground of Scotland, and then that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales as well to bring a wet afternoon for these areas. Further south and east, though, it should stay dry, but it will be a much cloudier day than today, and temperatures around average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees. Through Wednesday, we'll see another probably misty and murky start to the day before we see the next batch of rain arrive from the west, but this time this will pick up the temperatures. It will turn milder through the course of Wednesday and into Thursday, with further rain arriving into parts of the north and west. It looks a little bit colder to end the week again, though. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St. George's flag on a sporting occasion. And I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St. George's flag so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it. It will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, Britain. It is coming up to 1 o'clock on Monday, the 26th of February.
Well, what is we saying? A war of words in the Tory Islamophobia row. Sadiq Khan has hit out at Lee Anderson, saying he's poured petrol on the fires of hatred. It followed Lee Anderson's statement attacking the London Mayor's record.
And we're going live now to pictures of farmers' protests in both Madrid and Brussels. Chaos has erupted in both these European capitals as farmers breach police cordons and storm city centres in protest of EU anti-farming policy as they see it. A massive march there in Madrid, but also more chaotic scenes in Brussels with smoke billowing out and police cordons being breached, firecrackers on the road and the use of water cannon too. This is a pretty extraordinary scene that we'll be covering in greater depth later in the programme.
Yes, indeed. And Generation Sick note, people in their 20s are more likely to be out of work due to ill health than those in their 40s. A study finds young people claim a mental disorder more than any other age group. Why could that be? Well, as we were just seeing, things are absolutely kicking off in both Madrid and Brussels. The farmer protests there. Here we go. As you can see, people are protesting, marching through the centre of Madrid on your left-hand side. And then on the right, it's Brussels, billowing smoke. You can see tractors in the background, police having to cordon off streets.
Yes, whilst the Spanish farmer protests looks more orderly for the moment, it's the Belgian protest at the heart of the EU, the capital of the EU, that seems to have turned a little bit violent this afternoon. As we've been mentioning, these police cordons in some areas have been breached. The city centre in many parts has had to be evacuated, and clearly there has been a lot of disruption there. We'll be coming back to this throughout the programme, but we want to know what you have to say about these farmer protests, and crucially, could they be coming to Britain?
Well, yes, that. Remind ourselves, this is against some of the EU environmental laws and, of course, cheap imports that they say are undercutting their livelihood. So let us know what you make of it all. gbviews@gbnews.com. Could we see such things on the streets of the United Kingdom? But first, the headlines.
Thanks, Emily. It's 2 minutes past 1. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. Sadiq Khan says comments made by Lee Anderson on GB News were vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. In an editorial published in the Evening Standard in the last 30 minutes, the Mayor of London also criticised the Prime Minister for failing to mention anti-Muslim sentiment when he condemned Mr Anderson's comments. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that they were intended to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. The Prime Minister said this morning that the comments were unacceptable and wrong. The Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, though, saying that the money had already been promised 10 years ago. But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the government is empowering local communities.
2.5 billion for the north, 2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of Parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
The Transport Secretary Mark Harper speaking there. Now, the housing regulator warns that significant intervention is required after persistent shortfalls in the number of new homes being built. The Competition and Markets Authority says complex and unpredictable planning rules across the UK are partly to blame for new home targets being missed. It's also raising concerns over the quality of new build housing, with developers often focusing on price rather than the needs of particular areas. And there'll be an investigation after evidence was found suggesting that 8 house builders may be sharing commercially sensitive information. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He's expected to unveil a plan to run a so-called patriotic economy, which he says would include boosting home ownership and establishing the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described the plan as empty, but Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, told GB News, she says, it's the change Britain's economy needs.
Kind of expectations that people in our country used to have, that their kids would be better off than they were, that they'd have at least a slightly better quality of life. All of those dreams are just completely out of reach for very many people in our country. And Keir Starmer is absolutely determined to change that for the future, getting Britain building, actually making sure we have those good jobs up and down the country, reforming the planning system. The many changes that he's setting out today would make that big difference to British people.
In other news, there are angry scenes on the streets of Brussels this morning as farmers set fire to piles of tyres. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as more than 100 tractors parked around EU buildings as ministers arrived for meetings. They're demanding action from the European Union amid growing fury over free trade agreements. They say it's led to cheap supermarket prices, which they're blaming for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. And young people are more likely to be off work due to ill health than those in their 40s. That's according to a new report. The Resolution Foundation says it's radically different from the past, when work absences tended to increase with age. It cited a rise in mental health struggles among young people as a possible factor, with 34% of young people aged 18 to 24 reporting struggles in 2022, and that's compared to just 24% in the year 2000. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 7 minutes past 1, and the Islamophobic row over Lee Anderson's comments about Sadiq Khan being controlled by Islamists has intensified. Lee Anderson hit back this morning, sticking up by his comments and attacking the London Mayor's record. But in the past half hour, we've heard from Sadiq Khan himself. He's issued a statement accusing Lee Anderson of fueling the fires of hatred.
Yes, he's now calling on the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, to condemn what he says are racist and Islamophobic remarks, adding that the Conservative government are not taking anti-Muslim bigotry and racism seriously.
Well, joining us now with the very latest is our political editor, Christopher Hope, to run through what has happened today. Because, Chris, there's been a lot, really. We've heard a new statement from Lee, but also from the Mayor now too.
Yeah, I've got these statements here. It's a morning of statements for you, Tom and Emily. Afternoon again. That's right. We heard it from Lee Anderson. So let's just rewind slightly to what happened over the weekend. On Friday night, Lee Anderson made some comments which he admits were clumsy, claiming that there was an Islamist takeover of the mayoralty, or the way that and he's reflecting on the policing as he saw it on Wednesday when people were shining words onto Parliament which were anti-Israel and were deeply offensive to Jewish people, from the river to the sea, the idea of the destruction of the Jewish state. He was reacting to that on Friday. The following day, Saturday, he lost the whip because he refused to apologise. He had a statement written and was sent to CCHQ, but it wasn't issued because it didn't go far enough for the Tory party. He then released that statement to GB News this morning. We've been reporting on it all day. He says here, it's on our website in full, but in summary, he says he made some comments yesterday that people thought were divisive, but politics is divisive. And he's frustrated by the way Sadiq Khan is running London. The context, of course, here is the mayoral elections coming in about 2 or 3 months' time. So he's issued this statement refusing to apologise, and that's prompted more anger here from Sadiq Khan, who's written in the Standard this lunchtime in London, the London newspaper, putting it back on Rishi Sunak for not being tougher on what he says is Islamophobic remarks and this idea of Islamophobia in the Tory party. So it really is carrying on. And also, beyond all that, we've still got questions about the Speaker of the House of Commons. More MPs might sign a vote of no confidence in his behaviour last week during that debate on Gaza. So it is all kicking off in Westminster today.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Christopher Hope, for running us through that. We'll be back with Chris, actually, later on in the show. He'll bring us any updates as and when we get them.
But joining us now in the studio is the Labour Member of Parliament for Leeds North East and former Shadow Minister, Fabian Hamilton. Fabian, thank you so much for joining us here in the studio. First of all, your reaction to what has taken place over the weekend, because some people are calling it an almost mirror image of what happened within your party the previous weekend.
I wouldn't go that far. In fact, I think that's a gross exaggeration. I think there is no place in our society, in our polity, for hatred. By all means, criticise the record of the mayor if you don't like some of the things he's done. But where is the evidence for this supposed this Islamic plot by extremists? There is no evidence. It's simply Lee Anderson's opinion, and he's entirely wrong. If we're going to argue, let's argue on political grounds. Let's try and defeat the candidates we don't like and vote for the ones we do. But don't start shouting names and conspiracy theories. That really doesn't help any of us, frankly.
Well, this, of course, his comments were in the context of continuous protests on the streets of London that he clearly believes haven't been policed properly, and he clearly believes that the Mayor of London hasn't taken a tough enough stance on. Would you concede on that?
No, I wouldn't. I think there is a place in our society for legitimate demonstrations. There is no place for hatred. And where we've had the slogans and the anti-Semitic chants, that rightly should be dealt with by the police.
It wasn't, though.
Well,
we had the projection on Big Ben, and it wasn't dealt with by the police.
But nobody knows where that comes from. The Palestine Solidarity Campaign denied all knowledge of that. We don't know where it came from. But does that mean there's an Islamicist conspiracy going on? No, there isn't. The freedom to demonstrate, even if I don't agree with the demonstrators, is a fundamental right in our democracy. And to say that because I don't like what they're demonstrating on, that means there's some kind of plot, I'm sorry, that's just not acceptable.
No, I think you raised some very good points there about the idea that there's some sort of Islamist control of any politician. That goes far into the realm of conspiracy. But there were questions raised about... And perhaps it was clumsy language, but is there a point here to the idea that what Lee Anderson was saying is that there are members of Parliament and indeed elected officials who feel perhaps intimidated by some of the protests that we've seen? We saw the Speaker of the House of Commons change the standing orders or the way that they work in order to sort of appease, perhaps, some of those protesters.
Look, no elected representative and no member of the public should ever be intimidated by the right to protest. And if those protesters are going too far, we need the legislation, if it's not available, I think it is, to deal with those extremes. But this is a fraction of the people who come out on the streets in a heartfelt way to demonstrate for ideas, policies and arguments that they want to put forward. And everybody should have that right. And if Lee Anderson is not happy with that and not happy with what the mayor's doing, he should stand for mayor himself and try and get the votes necessary to win and change it himself, not just stand in the sidelines and spout hatred.
Sure, but a lot of people are very worried about Islamism and extremism on our streets and terrorism and such things. There was a debate being started about these matters relating to MP safety, but also the threat in general. And because of Lee Anderson's comments, perhaps, that seems to have been pushed to one side, and now the conversation is solely on Lee Anderson and Islamophobia in the Conservative Party, when many people, and I'm sure many of your constituents too, are deeply worried about the threat of extremism on our streets.
People are worried. It's not just Islamism, it's far-right conspiracy theorists as well. It's anybody who peddles hatred. You know, we have a country with 2 million Muslims who are peace-loving people in this country. We have about 300,000 Jewish people, some of whom do feel intimidated. I represent both communities in my constituency. I'm very fortunate. But let's live in peace together. Let's accept one another. That's what this country is all about. It's not about the extremes. It's not about shouting abuse and trying to garner hatred. It's about saying we can live together in peace. And if people step outside those margins, we have the legislation to deal with it, and if we don't, we need to have that legislation. Parliament can do that, but no MP, no representative, no member of the public.
Do you believe that it's adequately being dealt with? Because if you look at MI5's caseload, for example, it is awash with cases of Islamist extremists. And the terror threat there is very real. Yes, there is also a threat from the far right too, but it's much less so. It's much less of the caseload. So what can we do better? What would a Labour government do better to combat extremism?
Well, I'm not a spokesperson for whoever's on the front bench dealing with security issues. I think it's Dan Jarvis, my colleague, who's absolutely excellent, and I'm sure will come up with some very good policies. But logically, it seems to me, Parliament needs to give the legislation necessary and the resources to the security agencies. We have to have the personnel, we have to have the intelligence, both the electronic intelligence and the people on the ground. We need to ensure that children in schools aren't persuaded that these ideologies are acceptable in modern British society. They're simply not. And the vast majority of our citizens would not agree with any of those extremes, whether they're Islamist or whether they're far-right conspiracy theories.
To zoom back to Lee Anderson's comments for a second, the Mayor of London today has said that saying that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists is racist, is Islamophobic. Lee Anderson also said that Keir Starmer was controlled by Islamists in the same sort of list. Is that
same
racist?
sentence,
Is that racist? Is that Islamophobic?
Well, it's Islamophobic. I mean, obviously,
Can you
Keir
explain
Starmer's...
why it's Islamophobic to say that Keir Starmer is controlled by Islamists?
I come from a Jewish background, and when people say to me it's a Jewish conspiracy, as they have in the past, that the Jews control all the finances in this country and throughout the world, or the media, or whatever people want to suggest they control, it's utter nonsense. And of course there are Muslims in positions of authority, as there should be, and there are Jews too. Does that mean they control it, that it's some kind of conspiratorial aim to take over society? It does not. And I think it is deeply, deeply unpleasant and destructive to the harmony of our society for people, especially elected members, to go around saying, actually, these Islamists control all of you lot. When they said it about the Jews, it was anti-Semitic.
But language is important, and there is a difference
absolutely.
between Islamists and Muslims.
Yes, of course
which
there
is
is.
very important to highlight. And I think with some of this conversation, people have been using those two words interchangeably, which absolutely should not be happening.
As I should say they do with Zionism and Jews. You know, I mean, most Jewish people believe in the State of Israel. Some do not. Does that mean that all Israelis are Zionists, all Jews are Zionists and all Zionists are Jews? It does not. There are many people in this society who believe in the State of Israel who are not Jews.
Although given that 90+% of Jewish people believe in the State of Israel and the right to exist, perhaps it's a little bit different and can't quite compare Zionism with Islamism. Islamism is a tiny proportion of Muslims, and it's almost the reverse when it comes to Zionists and Jews. I'm afraid we have run out of time, but Fabian Hamilton, really, really do appreciate you coming in and talking through these thorny issues with us. Very important conversations to have.
Yes, indeed. But moving on, the Church of England has told its parishes to draw up race action plans to address issues of racial injustice.
The General Synod passed the motion last night after it was filed by its first black female bishop, Rose Hudson Wilkin. It also calls for a better data collection to monitor diversity levels across parishes.
Well, let's speak to Khadija Khan, who's a journalist and member of Advisory Council at the organisation Don't Divide Us. Khadija, thank you very much for joining us. What's your reaction to this, a race action plan for parishes under the Church of England?
Thank you so much for having me. They are embracing a woke ideology under the guise of a race action plan. And regardless of the literal meaning of woke, woke is a cultish ideology in all its manifestation. And we see that people who are very much, they claim to be torchbearer of this ideology. They are very much absolutist. They are very much cultish in their attitudes. And just imagine for a moment if this sort of ideology comes from a place of religion. It's an open secret that people follow religion not for all reasonable reasonings. They follow religion because they want to follow, they follow it by heart. And when this kind of cultish attitude or ideology comes from a place of religion, it should be worrisome for everyone.
What if the church would say that this is just about reaching out to more communities, that they want more people to join their flock? Why shouldn't they have an action plan to try and perhaps recruit more convertees?
There should be no problem if people want to introduce or explore more programs or networks to socialize. There should be no problem about that. But when they do it under the guise of being woke in the current context, then of course there is a problem. And it is very typical for the Church of England to use a religious language to attract people when they call it that being woke has been declared a sin in the current context by the left. It's ironic that left is the first victim of this woke cultish ideology. And now we see that they are attracting people in the name of embracing something that is like standing against racial injustice in the society. But the cementings are being used in this whole situations are very much divisive, in my opinion, because if you look at the plan, they are addressing mainly to the ethnic minorities. The mainstream society has been, isolated in this, you can say, struggle to eliminate racial injustice. So in my opinion, you cannot resolve issues related to race or any other thing in the society or any other issue that we are facing at the moment when you isolate ethnic minorities from the mainstream society.
You believe they should have had a much broader sort of call to society as a whole. Khadija Khan, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but thank you so much for talking to us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Appreciate your time.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've heard the word Islamophobia many times over the past few days, indeed over the past hour or so on this show, but after the break we'll be debating whether it's time to ditch the term in favour of anti-Muslim hatred. You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
You have a president in President Biden who's not enforcing the law that was passed by Congress. President Obama, criticize him or not, actually enforced the law and was deporting people that had crossed illegally. Of course, President Trump enforced the law and improved the law to make sure that and worked with Mexico to have the Remain in Mexico policy. Biden has abandoned federal policy. In fact, he's deliberately trying to let in as many immigrants as possible. More for the Democrats, more is better and less is racist.
Just astonishing. And the statement that Greg Abbott put out is really feisty stuff. He said the federal government has broken the contract between the United States and the state of Texas. And the eye numbers, Greg, are simply eye-watering. 6 million illegal immigrants have crossed our southern border in just 3 years, Governor Abbott says. That's more than the population of 33 states in the United States. Astonishing numbers.
And Martin, that's just Texas. If you add Arizona and other border states, you know, it's pushing 10 million. By the end of Biden's term, it'll be 11 million. A study by Yale University a few weeks ago, 3 very liberal professors that did the study estimate there's 22 million illegal aliens. So this is a crisis that was created by Biden. It's what he wants. They want unfettered access to the border. They're letting them in. It's a real hardship on the working people of Texas and other border states. And now it's a real hardship on cities that the federal government, as well as the governors of Texas and other states, are sending some of the migrants to those so-called sanctuary cities.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 25 minutes past 1, and the Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, has claimed that Labour would risk creating a blasphemy law with its definition of Islamophobia.
She said it's best to use the term anti-Muslim hatred to protect both religious freedom and the freedom to criticise religion.
Well, this comes as Labour Shadow Equalities Secretary Annalise Dodds attacked the Tories for failing to call out Islamophobia, in her words, in light of Lee Anderson's suspension from the party.
Well, joining us now is human rights and LGBT campaigner Peter Tatchell, who opposes the term Islamophobia, and human rights campaigner Aisha Ali Khan, who thinks the term should not be dropped. Peter, shall we start with you? Peter, where are your concerns about the term Islamophobia? Do you believe it needs to be replaced by something else? What's your view?
Well, my starting point is that we must protect Muslim people against prejudice, discrimination and hate crime. We must protect people. But Islam is an idea, and like all ideas, it should be open to criticism. So strictly meaning, Islamophobia means fear of Islam. Now, if you're a gay person or a woman, there are some aspects of Islam or some interpretations of Islam which rightly make you fearful. If you live in an Islamic majority country, most of them are dictatorships with appalling human rights records. So I want to say, let's use the term anti-Muslim prejudice to focus on protecting Muslim people, not protecting the idea of Islam, because like all ideas, it should be open to scrutiny and criticism.
Aisha, that's a fair point, isn't it? The word Islamophobia could be could be criminalising to some extent people who are critical of Islam.
I don't agree with what Peter's just said. For me, as a practicing Muslim, it's not just an ideology, it's actually my religion, it's my way of life. And I think that the fact we've got this definition that has been adopted by the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, and many other people, by the way, it protects us from hatred, from acts of hatred that are targeted towards us simply because we are Muslim. And I'll give you an example right now. Recently we had an example of a pig's head thrown into a home of a Muslim person. In the past, we've had similar acts where we've had bacon left in the mosque. In the mosque, we've had people playing loud music when it's times of prayer. These are just examples, obviously. These acts are designed to harass, intimidate, cause harm to Muslims. They might not necessarily be something that offends, say, non-Muslims, but it's definitely something that Muslims would find offensive. So I definitely think that we need to keep the term. It's something that we've spent many years campaigning on. We had a report that was published in 2019 which set out criteria, and it was adopted by the Labour Party, it was adopted by the Lib Dems, as I've said, because it set out ways that Muslims would feel intimidated and harassed, but also identifying that as Muslims living in the UK, we are visible. We
Aisha, what to Peter's point, though? Sorry to interrupt, Aisha. What to Peter's point that there might be some people in the United Kingdom who are genuinely fearful of Islam? There might be some refugees in the United Kingdom who've fled Muslim-majority countries because they'd be persecuted there for their sexuality.
No, absolutely. And as a human rights campaigner and a women's rights campaigner, I've always stood up for people who've been oppressed, even people obviously oppressed and targeted by Islamists and so on. But I do feel that these are a tiny minority, as Fabian Hamilton, the MP you just had on, said, the actions and behaviours and beliefs of a tiny minority should not be used to target everybody. As you can see, I don't wear a headscarf, but I will, but I have campaigned and argued for everybody to have the right to wear and dress as they want to, regardless of your religious background. This is just an example of living in a tolerant society, and there are many other people like me, but sadly we are constantly tarnished because of the actions of a minority of people, and we are then left to apologize or to say not in our name and so on, and it's really unfair, by the way. But coming back to this
Can I just come back in a minute?
Yeah, let's Peter to come in.
Yeah. I mean, the examples that Aisha has given are all examples of attacks and threats against Muslim people, not against an idea, against people. And I oppose that, and I stand with the Muslim community against that prejudice, hatred, and hostility. That is absolutely wrong. But I think, as I said, what's wrong with the term Islamophobia is it focuses on the idea of Islam, not on Muslim people. And we need to protect Muslim people, not to protect any particular idea. And I say that, including my own ideas. My ideas should be open to scrutiny and criticism. I don't want special protection. I want everybody to have the right to free speech. And of course, when it comes to oppression of Muslim people, in some cases, Muslims are oppressed by other Muslims. So I know liberal progressive Muslims who don't share all the aspects of Islamic teaching. Some are ex-Muslims. They've suffered terrible persecution from other Muslims. But it's not about the idea per se, it's about them as people. I say focus on Muslim people, protect them, don't protect an idea.
Rather than the religion. Aisha, would you see it as Islamophobia if someone criticised the contents of the Quran or criticised the Prophet or some of the beliefs that are in the Islamic faith? Would you consider that Islamophobia?
No, I wouldn't actually. I think it's important that everybody is allowed to challenge things that they don't understand or they don't agree with. And I also believe that as Muslims, we should be able to stand up to, those challenges, not stand up to them, but accept those challenges and be able to communicate and have an open dialogue. I mean, I've watched over the years, I've seen what has happened, the terror attacks in Paris, for example, the Charlie Hebdo incident. I've just given you an example right there. I don't believe that people should be targeted for whatever religious beliefs that they believe in, but also I think there has to be some kind of understanding and acceptance and tolerance of people, and that goes both ways. So as a Muslim, I accept that there are elements in my own religion that should be more tolerant towards LGBTQI and other communities.
Really sorry, Aisha, but we're going to have to end it there because we've come up to the break, but really great to get your view on all of this. Aisha Ali Khan and, of course, Peter Tatchell, human rights campaigner.
Oh, I wish we'd have more time there. We're just getting into that, but you know what?
You've got to leave people wanting more,
Absolutely.
Tom.
Well, coming up, European farmers continue their protests ahead of crunch talks. We'll be looking at these live pictures, very feisty scenes in Brussels and Madrid. Much more of this to come after your headlines.
It's 1:33. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your headlines. Sadiq Khan says comments made by Lee Anderson on GB News were vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. In an editorial published in the Evening Standard this afternoon, the Mayor of London also criticised the Prime Minister for failing to mention anti-Muslim sentiment when he condemned Mr Anderson's comments. The former Tory deputy chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. The Prime Minister said this morning that the comments were unacceptable and wrong. New investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. That's according to Rishi Sunak. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. The money could be used to expand mass transit systems, refurbish rail and bus stations, and repair potholes. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds, but the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money was already promised 10 years ago. And farmers are descending on the streets of Brussels, setting fires to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors. It's in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings of the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame are damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2692 and €1.1698. The price of gold is £1,602 and 8 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,682 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
The EU rules are trying to choke even that.
Yeah.
And I just think, I would join this protest in a heartbeat. And you are right to point out this stuff about them being right-wing. How dare they slate them as right-wing when these are real people whose livelihoods are
And remember,
being
a lot of people who work in the farm industry, Malone, get paid very little money.
They get paid.
Agricultural workers are very badly paid.
They get paid nothing, Pierce. And, the profits... I think on Clark's Farm I read somewhere that I saw that when you sell it like a sheep's skin, it's 30 pence or something.
Right.
And you say, what?
Yeah.
And so you wonder how they can manage that. And I think after a year, Clarkson had made a handful of pounds.
He made like 90 quid profit or something.
In a whole year working.
But Carol makes a really good point, though, doesn't she, Nikki, about this idea that we go to the supermarkets, we shop there, we eat our food, we don't often give it a thing. And the farmers have become so frustrated by this idea that they are not respected.
Absolutely. I mean, they're running what are effectively small businesses, often family businesses that are being passed down through generations. They also tend to know the land and the animals better than anyone else in those areas. I am all for green protests, I'm all for climate change activism, but actually... the only way you can do that is gradually. It's exactly what we've seen with Port Talbot. You can't just go in and say, you're not going to do it anymore this way. You've got to do it this way instead.
The Tata Steel thing.
Yes, exactly. You've got to do it this way instead. Lots of farmers are on board with protecting the planet, but they can't do it overnight. You've got to give them time. So they're protesting, they're saying no farmers, no food.
When
well,
you
it
say
can't
you
get any more
support some of
obvious.
these environmental protests, you're not one of these closet supporters of Just Stop Oil, are you?
I'm not a closet supporter. I think I've been quite open about Just Stop Oil.
No.
I don't like all their methods, but I do like the message.
Any of them.
But I do appreciate the message. But sometimes you've got to do difficult things.
What they're asking for now, those protesters, are unrealistic. What these protesters are asking for is not unrealistic.
No.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 39 minutes past 1, and these are the scenes from both Madrid and Brussels, where farmers are protesting in numbers.
Yes, they are indeed. It comes as EU agricultural ministers meet to discuss responses to the current crisis that the sector is facing. Now, farmers are breaching police cordons. You've got them storming city centres. You can see on the left, that is in Madrid. Huge numbers of protesting farmers. A massive tractor going through the middle of the main city centre there. They're protesting EU anti-farming policy.
Well, what exactly does this all mean? Why are they out there? And could we see this happening in the UK too? Let's discuss this now with Andrew Meredith, who's the editor of Farmers Weekly. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here. First of all, what are the grievances that European farmers have? And do British farmers feel the same way?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. The European farmers and the British farmers have similar but not identical grievances. I think over in Europe, we've seen the protests since the beginning of January over a multitude of issues. It's effectively a collective howl that the process, the business of producing food is becoming harder, and they're getting less money for it, whether that's because supermarkets are imposing harder terms on them or because the regulatory burden of environmental red tape is getting higher and higher, or because the trade deals from outside of the EU are letting in food that it costs less to produce. All of that is coming together. And I think now that the genie is out of the bottle with protests having taken place, the threshold for more protests taking place gets lower and lower each time. Here in the UK, we're predicting, or we're hearing, that there could be a protest of up to 15,000 Welsh farmers in Cardiff this Wednesday. So watch this space as to whether those ambitious projections from the organisers come to pass or whether it'll be a much more muted affair. But farmers will be gathering outside of the Senedd in Cardiff Bay this Wednesday. That's what we're hearing today.
Wow, so we could see 15,000, up to 15,000 Welsh farmers protesting too. Demonstrations like this with their tractors, perhaps?
I don't know the extent to which they will seek to disrupt in this way. I certainly wouldn't anticipate that they're going to be careering through police barricades or disrupting the peace in general. The protests so far have been very peaceful, very law-abiding. I'd imagine they'll be on foot around the Parliament building there rather than blocking the roads by and large. But we have seen small-scale tractor protests in other parts of Wales in the last week or 10 days, but no indication and no appetite from the organisers that I speak to anyway, that they want to escalate things in the way that has been seen in France or here in Brussels today.
Andrew, we saw Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, join one of these Welsh farmer protests last week. Pretty extraordinary scenes. Why is it that Welsh farmers seem to be more irate than English farmers?
So since Brexit, agricultural policy, by and large, apart from trade policy, is devolved. So the policy that the Welsh Labour government is formulating is different to the Tory government in Westminster, while the English government is further down the line and imposing some quite harsh cuts as they transition to a new type of environmental policy here. English farmers can see much more detail about what's coming down the road, and they've had longer to prepare for it. In Wales, it's been a much messier affair. There's been 3 consultations now on the environmental policy that will provide money to farmers in the future. There have been 3 consultations because nobody can agree on what they want to do, how much money they're willing to pay for these actions. And the worst case projections in Wales are that the scheme in its current iteration, although it's not been finalised, would see money taken out of farming, projected job losses, and an altogether weakened farming system in Wales. And farmers are just really, really worried about the future, their livelihoods, and their ability to hand on their farming businesses to the next generation.
And Andrew, we've also seen very recently, actually, farmers on their tractors staging a slow protest by Dover, in the port of Dover, haven't we? So we've already seen a start of these types of protests in England.
We have. My analysis, Farmers Weekly's analysis of it, is that anger on average here in England, as I say, is much lower, but that does not mean it is non-existent. That protest in Dover was very much focused around trade issues. We signed trade deals, obviously, since Brexit with Australia and New Zealand with different terms, and it will gradually become almost unfettered access for Australian beef and New Zealand lamb. Were those negotiations taking place today? I wonder, would the government have had the courage to sign it on the basis that they did? I would be very interested to look through those sliding doors into an alternate reality and see if they had been delayed, whether they would have got over the line. The Boris Johnson government obviously signed those. Rishi Sunak, he has struck quite a different tone with the farmers. Boris Johnson was quite dismissive on a number of occasions, but Rishi Sunak really trying to make political hay now out of the fact that a Labour government in Wales has really upset the farmers. He wants that rural vote at the general election, so he's doing all he can to put his arms around rural voters and farmers in particular at the moment.
Yeah, it's fascinating you say that both England and Wales are pursuing these sort of environmental policies, these replacements for the common agricultural policy. But in England, it seems to be less harsh, or at least more predictable, than the worries in Wales. Do you think that's because Rishi Sunak represents a very rural constituency in Richmond, in North Yorkshire? Or why is it that England and the government here has seemed to have got it better with farmers than the Welsh government?
The formulation of these goes right back to 2018 or even before, when Michael Gove sat in the Department of Environment, Secretary of State's chair, and when there was Therese Thingamabob. That's how many prime ministers we've had. I can't remember her surname now. Theresa May. There we go. Oh. Theresa May was the prime minister. Look, we've had longer to prepare. There are some harsh cuts. A farmer that was earning £40,000 in area payments 3 years ago will have got £25,000 in last December in their annual payment. By 2028, those area payments will have completely gone. But what is mollifying arable farmers in particular is the fact that they can see this suite of options, whether it's planting wild bird food, whether it's farming in an environmentally kind of way, but less ploughing, for example, reducing fuel emissions. They know the payments they're going to get for that, and they have access to that detail, as I say. But the upland farmers in England, they are still concerned there is much less on offer for them. And so there is still a few hurdles for the government to clear here, I think, before they can conclude that farmers really are happy with how things are going.
Well, Andrew Meredith, editor of Farmers Weekly, really appreciate your time. Thank you for talking us through those thorny issues there facing farmers.
I can't condone Belgian farmers spraying manure at police, though, I must say, and that's what they have been. Quite funny, yes. But if they were just stop oil activists, you'd be fuming about it.
That's true. No, lawless protests should never be encouraged.
Although the police are baton wielding.
But it is fascinating, though, the way in which these policies can be implemented and predictability can matter so much. Ultimately, I don't think anyone appreciates the old EU system of just paying people simply for having a farm, rather than the way in which you conduct your farm. I mean, it's almost giving people more money for owning more land. That was a terrible system. So I think we're moving to a more rational system, perhaps, but clearly not in Wales.
Well, there you go. He said 15,000 farmers could take to the streets, take to the roads in protest. We shall see what happens with that one. But coming up, Generation Sick Note. Young people are increasingly blaming mental health issues for not being at work. But is there more to it than simply laziness? Tom?
Well, I guess we'll find out soon. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Alabama, yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting, and that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first. But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 1:51. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a new report says young people are increasingly blaming their mental health for being jobless, with the number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues more than doubling in the past decade.
Well, in light of these figures, we're asking, do young people just need to suck it up and get on with it? Let's pose this question to the writer and mental health advocate, ambassador for Seen and Rethink Mental Illness, Rachel Kelly. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. Firstly, is there a massively much larger problem with young people compared to older people? Or is this just an issue of perhaps over-reporting in younger generations?
Well, it definitely is more of an issue for younger people. We've seen that in the report that came out today. In terms of, are we over-reporting? Are we imagining a problem where perhaps there isn't one? It is tricky with mental health because we don't have the same diagnostic tools as we do with physical health. We don't have a blood test or a brain scan that can say for sure that someone is suffering from a mental health problem. So there is always going to be this problem of the exact, certainty. But my view and my experience of working with mental health charities is that, yes, of course, there's going to be a few people, you mentioned in your intro, the idea that people are being lazy, who may or may not have a mental health problem, but the vast majority do.
It's very concerning to see so many young people not in work because they've got a mental health disorder. What are the most prevalent conditions for young people that are stopping them from being able to work? Because most people would assume that having a job will help people with their mental health, but actually it seems to be turning people away from work. Are they that badly affected?
Well, you are absolutely right. Being in employment, we know, is preventative and it's good for your mental health. So it is a tragedy that these young people aren't working because actually getting into work, having a sense of purpose, having a reason to get up in the morning is very good for your mental health. So I think one of the problems is around words and definitions. So the word mental health now embraces a very broad spectrum. And when we're thinking about what people are suffering, the vast majority across all cases of mental health problems are anxiety and depression. So, and this is a spectrum from people who suffer mild anxiety, which might not be diagnosable or seen as a mental health condition, right through to very severe disabling, severe depressive disorders. So there is a very broad spectrum, but it all is given the name mental health. At the very far end of the spectrum are people who suffer things we don't hear nearly so much about. So things like psychosis, schizophrenia, very serious mental health conditions. But that's about a kind of 5% across this very broad range. So most of the young people who are not working are suffering from anxiety or depression.
Thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to leave it there, unfortunately, but great to get your view on all of this. Rachel Kelly, Ambassador for Sane and Rethink Mental Illness. I mean, this is not good for our economy and society that so many young people simply aren't in work because of mental health. I mean, is it the pandemic? Is it, as you said, over-reporting? Very, very worrying indeed.
Well, coming up, we'll be back on that Islamophobia row. Should that be the word that we're using? And do you agree with what Lee Anderson said? Well, much more on that after the break.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It should be staying dry for many areas through the rest of the day, with some late sunshine to come. However, it will be a cold night tonight. That's as high pressure is building in from the south and west, so that will settle things down through the rest of the night. However, in the north and west, we'll start to see some thicker cloud and rain arrive by tomorrow morning. So the winds should ease tonight, allowing for temperatures to dip down quite early on, and we should see some mist and fog developing mainly across central and southeastern areas. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. But away from any mist and fog, it will turn frosty, particularly for inland areas of Wales, England, northern England as well. Further north and west, though, we'll see some wet weather arrive by tomorrow morning. Quite a blustery band of rain will push through around rush hour for northwestern areas of Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. That could bring some snow to the high ground of Scotland, and then that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales as well to bring a wet afternoon for these areas. Further south and east, though, it should stay dry, but it will be a much cloudier day than today, and temperatures around average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees. Through Wednesday, we'll see another probably misty and murky start to the day before we see the next batch of rain arrive from the west, but this time this will pick up the temperatures. It will turn milder through the course of Wednesday and into Thursday, with further rain arriving into parts of the north and west. It looks a little bit colder to end the week again, though. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat. Yep. Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system. And
so there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offender behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Monday, the 26th of February.
A war of words in the Tory Islamophobia row. Sadiq Khan has hit out at Lee Anderson, saying he's poured petrol on the fires of hatred. This follows Lee Anderson's statement attacking the London Mayor's record. We're expecting to hear from both Sir Keir Starmer and Rishi Sunak in this hour.
And live pictures from Brussels as tension boils over on the continent, with farmers storming city centres, fighting with police, causing mass disruption, all ahead of crunch talks in the EU to tackle the crisis that the agricultural sector is facing.
And Generation Sick note, people in their 20s are more likely to be out of work due to ill health than those in their 40s. A study finds young people claim a mental disorder more than any other age group.
Now, we've been asking for your views on our conversation of the day, Islamophobia. Is that the right word to be using when we're talking about hatred or prejudice towards Muslims?
Yes, well, Michael says Islamophobia doesn't protect Muslims from attack, it protects their religious ideas from attacks and criticism. Yes, that's exactly the point that Peter Tatchell was making earlier on. You should be free to criticise a religion and the beliefs.
Well, Andy agrees. He says, I have a couple of thoughts to share on this subject. Firstly, speaking against Islam is not racist because Islam is an ideology, not a race. And I suppose there's a fair bit of truth in that.
Yes, we can't have blasphemy laws in this country, thank you very much. Natasha says, the very nature of not being able to scrutinise is what causes hate and division. Education is key to peace. So there she goes on.
Virginia says, we need to stop using all these anti-something words and getting rid of all of these so-called hate crimes. It's stopping open discussion and labelling all disagreements as hatred. I'm not sure I quite agree with that one. I mean, when it comes to anti-Semitism, that is the word for anti-Jewish racism, right? So that I think is different. But that's talking about a people, not a set of ideas. It's not like if you criticise something in the Torah, you're an anti-Semite, right? But if you criticise something in the Quran, that could be seen as Islamophobic. And that's the key difference. That's why they're very, very different things.
Yes, and there's been an argument over what exact definition to adopt of Islamophobia. The Conservatives seem to have a different view from every other party on this. They pushed back on broadening that description of what it means, Islamophobia. But again, the debate is very much back, as Annalise Dodds and also Conservative MPs have been using the term Islamophobia instead of anti-Muslim hatred or prejudice.
Yeah, but we do want more of your views on this. Should we ditch the word Islamophobia? And are you worried about a new government coming in and making it law that Islamophobia, that definition, that new widened definition, could become law? Is that a worry when it comes to blasphemy laws? Well, GB Views at gbnews.com, all after your headlines with Sophia.
Tom, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 2 o'clock. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB Newsroom. Sadiq Khan says comments made by Lee Anderson on GB News were vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. In an editorial published in the Evening Standard this afternoon, the Mayor of London also criticised the Prime Minister for failing to mention anti-Muslim sentiment when he condemned Mr Anderson's comments. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. The Prime Minister has refused to describe the comments as Islamophobic, but said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The Prime Minister says new investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up action. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds. The Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money had already been promised 10 years ago. But Transport Secretary Mark Harper says the government is empowering local communities.
£2.5 billion for the north, £2.2 billion for the Midlands. That money is going to local councils. It's for them to spend on the local priorities that they set, that they think are important to their local communities, and they'll reach those conclusions by consulting those communities, but also talking, very importantly, to their members of parliament about what those important local transport priorities are. The whole point is it's not for ministers to set those priorities, it's for councils to set them. We think those decisions are better made closer to the people that are going to benefit from them.
The Transport Secretary Mark Harper speaking there. Now, owners of leasehold properties often face high and unclear charges from the management of communal facilities, with protection from consumers often proving to be inadequate. That's according to a report by the Competition and Markets Authority. It found that management companies often fail to properly inform homeowners of important details relating to the maintenance of common areas. It also found that bills are often quite high and unpredictable, with vague so-called management charges making up to 50% or more of the bill. The watchdog also found that many homeowners are unable to switch management companies. They're calling on the government to bring better accountability to the sector. Meanwhile, Sir Keir Starmer says his party will deliver what he called a future built in Britain by Britain if Labour wins the next election. He's unveiling a plan to run a so-called patriotic economy, which he says would include boosting home ownership and establishing the next generation of new towns. Housing Minister Lee Rowley described the plan as empty, but Chair of the Labour Party, Annalise Dodds, told GB News it's the change Britain needs.
Kind of expectations that people in our country used to have, that their kids would be better off than they were, that they'd have at least a slightly better quality of life. All of those dreams are just completely out of reach for very many people in our country. And Keir Starmer is absolutely determined to change that for the future, getting Britain building, actually making sure we have those good jobs up and down the country, reforming the planning system. The many changes that he's setting out today would make that big difference to British people.
In other news, farmers are descending on the streets of Brussels, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they say are blaming for damaging of European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. And young people are more likely to be off work due to ill health than those in their 40s. That's according to a new report. The Resolution Foundation says it's radically different from the past, when work absences tended to increase with age. It cited a rise in mental health struggles among young people as a possible factor, with 34% of young people aged 18 to 24 reporting struggles in 2022. That's compared to just 24% in the year 2000. And for the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts. Now it's back to Tom and Emily.
It's 2:08 and the Islamophobia row over comments made by Lee Anderson continues. The London Mayor Sadiq Khan has accused the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party of fuelling the fires of hatred.
Well, this comes as the Ashfield Member of Parliament, who of course lost the Conservative whip, fights back, claiming Mr Khan has lost control of our streets and is failing the capital.
Right, well, let's speak to political correspondent for The Spectator, James Heal. James, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, before we get on to Lee Anderson and his comments and all the statements that have come out in the last hour or so, I want to ask you about something curious that's been going on in Tory WhatsApp groups with Tobias Ellwood. What's going on there?
Yes, so this is one of several rows that broke out over the weekend, Emily. And this one I reported on first was about a row that broke out between one of the more liberal members of the Conservative Party and probably one that's more sort of conservative, which was John Hayes posted in one of the Conservative backbench groups over the weekend that Islamist terror was the biggest threat facing the United Kingdom. And Tobias Ellwood then replied almost immediately asking Sir John Hayes to delete that message. And it prompted a bit of a mass pile-on with various right-wingers across different strands of thought, all criticising Tobias Ellwood. And I think for me, this shows that the row often is about not just the substance of the issue, but also about personalities involved. So I think that there's a lot of Tory MPs who frankly don't really like Tobias Ellwood after his video last summer, which was seen as being very favourable to the Taliban regime in Afghanistan. And so I think this shows how the Lee Anderson row isn't just confined to the pros and merits and strengths and weaknesses of Lee Anderson's comments. It's also about other things. So it's serving as displacement activity for a lot of tension within the Conservative Party that's bubbling over right now.
Yes, and your scoop really revealed this sort of division that is boiling over in the Conservative Party on almost every issue. But we also learn about more WhatsApp messages where Tory MPs are rowing in almost behind Lee Anderson, saying to ministers not to condemn the comments as Islamophobic or racist because their inboxes are full of people who agree with him.
Yes, and I think it's not a surprise, really. Lee Anderson has a lot of friends in the Conservative Party, and I think that's the thing we need to remember here, is often if you suspend a member of a party, a lot of their friends are going to be pretty annoyed by it. And so I've been speaking to a couple of members of the Tory right today, and they've been saying, well, I disagree with what Lee Anderson said and the way he said it, but also I'm concerned that a precedent's now been set, and really the so-called wet wing of the Conservative Party is going to be emboldened by this. So I think that it's no surprise that people are both personally sending their support to Lee Anderson within the Conservative Party on the right of the party, but also there are private concerns that this is going to be the first of other suspensions. And it's no surprise, Tom, that today we've seen Labour go out and double down and call for Liz Truss to be suspended as well. So there's a sort of element perhaps of what Churchill and feeding the crocodiles with this, is that one suspension is never going to be enough for the Labour Party. They want others as well.
So where does Rishi Sunak go from here? We've seen Sadiq Khan has made his voice loud and clear in the Evening Standard today, 1 hour ago. He's written a long piece on this. He says, we are yet to hear the Prime Minister call Lee Anderson's remarks what they are: Islamophobic, anti-Muslim hate and racist. Rishi Sunak won't want to concede on that, will he?
No, of course not. And I think that it's noticeable perhaps that this decision was taken without Rishi Sunak making a statement to camera. It was announced that he was suspended on Saturday. And I think that there'd be a real keenness for Rishi Sunak not to confront Lee Anderson on camera, not least, of course, because just 5-6 weeks ago, Lee Anderson was the deputy party chairman, and the two of them starred together in an online Conservative advert. So I think that it would be suboptimal in Whitehall parlance to have the Prime Minister attack Lee Anderson in this way or criticise his comments in that way. But I do think, obviously, Labour are very keen to keep up the pressure on all of this. And you can easily see, Emily, that how on Wednesday afternoon, a lot of Labour MPs will probably be prepped to try and bring this up at PMQ. So I suspect Rishi Sunak, at some point or other, will have to make an on-camera statement about this.
There'll be a PMQs to watch. But, James, do you think there's a way back for Lee Anderson? Do you think the reason why the Prime Minister perhaps is holding back from that direct criticism is that really this suspension isn't a permanent thing at all? It's a bit of time in the sin bin.
I think perhaps that, I think it's a recognition of Rishi Sunak's relative political weakness in one sense. Obviously it'd be very different if, say, he was in Keir Starmer's position with a 20-point lead in the polls. At that point, the leader is emboldened and able to do almost anything. I think perhaps there was also a sense that we are only 6, 7, 8 weeks or so away from the London mayoral election, and that I think that a lot of Conservative MPs are going to be very keen to criticise Sadiq Khan. The key thing is that they don't do what Lee Anderson did and use this kind of clumsy language like he did. So I think it's perhaps a warning for the others. But the Tories obviously are very much more keen to make it about Labour splits and keep up things with the Azir Ali row ahead of Rochdale's Thursday by-election, rather than talking about their own woes. So it's no surprise then that both parties are pointing fingers at each other.
But of course there is a narrative building that the Conservative Party harbours lots of Islamophobes and anti-Muslims.
Well, yes, and you've seen people like Saeed Avazi, the former chairman of the Conservative Party, come out and say this hasn't been properly dealt with before. There's long-standing issues. Remember, of course, a lot of commentary around similar claims back in 2019 when Boris Johnson was accused of Islamophobia. So it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think really it's going to be something that the Conservative Party really has to watch themselves. And it reminds all Tory MPs right now, at a time when both parties want to make their opposition splits a key part of their election narrative, the importance, if you're going to say something, make sure you have evidence for it, because otherwise it leads to your party leader having to face days of questions about it. And you've seen, Emily, in the last 72 hours or so, both Oliver Dowden and Grant Shapps, who are two of the more impressive media performances on the Tory front bench, really struggle with some of these questions because they are very difficult ones. Tories always hate criticising other Tories on air, but it's something they're going to have more of, I suspect, as the election approaches.
No doubt. Well, James Heal, thank you so much for joining us, political correspondent for The Spectator magazine. Really appreciate it. Now, Emily, I think that one of the fascinating things here is that James was right. If you're going to say something, have evidence for it. There are lots of things that Lee Anderson could have said about Sadiq Khan, about his record, about his perhaps perceived weakness in the face of some of these groups, without saying he's controlled by Islamists.
Yes, indeed. He really, Well, he got himself into this trouble, of course, with what he said. It's how he gets out of it. Will he get out of it? Will he be back? Will he have the Tory whip restored? You think so, don't you?
I think he will.
You think this is just temporary sin bin?
But Alan has written in to say that Lee Anderson has spoken his mind and has suffered for this, saying a bit rich coming from Khan, seeing as he's stoked racial hatred. So some of people in the inbox are really on the side of Lee Anderson here.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've heard from the London Mayor on Lee Anderson's comments. Let's now hear from the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. This interview has just come in.
It's Islamophobia, and the Prime Minister should call it out for what it is. The reason he won't is because he's so weak. They're divided, they're chaotic, and if they're re-elected, we're going to have 5 more years of this. It is only Labour now that can unite the country, bring people together, turn a page on this and actually usher in the sort of society, the sort of future that people desperately want. But the Prime Minister lacks the strength. He's too weak. He can't call it out for what it is. That's how weak he is.
But there is a huge problem with extremism now, isn't there? We've seen it. The protesters last week saying they wanted Parliament to have to lock the doors from the river to the sea projected on Big Ben. You've got divisions within your own party too. We've got a Rochdale by-election without a Labour candidate because of anti-Semitic comments. The Conservatives aren't the only ones having problems with this, are they?
This is really basic. Islamophobia is something which should be called out by every political leader. And the Prime Minister isn't calling it too weak. I don't think anybody can make excuses for this Prime Minister and say it's all too difficult. It's very straightforward. He lacks the backbone to call this out for what it is because he's leading a divided party, a chaotic party, and it's no wonder people have just had enough of this after 14 years and desperately want change.
He didn't really answer the question there, did he? About the divisions within the Labour Party and also about extremism on our streets with regards to pro-Palestine protests. And, of course, this all does divert from the whole scandal that engulfed last week about the Speaker.
Yeah, and indeed the scandal about Rochdale and Azir Ali, the candidate of the Labour Party, who then was not the candidate of the Labour Party, but is still on the ballot with the Labour Party's name written next to him, and was lunching last Friday with Labour Party candidates. But let's talk about all of that Keir Starmer was talking about with our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, what did we learn from Sir Keir Starmer there? He seems to be doubling down.
Yeah, he is, isn't he? And hi, Emily. Hi, Tom. That's right. I mean, in a sense, the Labour leader there is echoing what Sadiq Khan has been saying in the Evening Standard this lunchtime here in London, saying that these remarks were racist, anti-Muslim or Islamophobic, and why weren't they called out as such by the party leadership? Now, those remarks, that characterisation are denied by Lee Anderson, but clearly it's all about trying to drive home the idea there's an Islamophobia problem in the Tory party, and that's been an issue around the party for years and years and years. It fell away when the anti-Semitism issues arose in Labour under Jeremy Corbyn. There's a risk here, I think, for the party leadership that unless they can be a bit more tougher on this and the suggestion of it, it will start to hurt them electorally.
Certainly an issue, but I suppose this is an issue that focuses on both parties, really, because there have been accusations for a long time about the Labour Party's approach to anti-Semitism, and they almost, to some extent, mirror the Conservative Party's accusations around Islamophobia, although the Tory chairman today has been adamant that there was a review into Islamophobia in the Tory party that cleared it.
And that's right, there's a definition of Islamophobia. It's opposing Islam for political means, and that definition has not been adopted by the Tory party. And of course, the idea of definitions are important. We saw, didn't we, what was anti-Semitism, what did it mean? Under Jeremy Corbyn, that definition, the IHRC definition, was not accepted for years, really. So in a sense, I think this does threaten to become a problem for the Tory party unless they can grip it, and that's why they've acted on Lee Anderson. But today in the House of Commons, in the lobby briefing for lobby journalists, it was made clear that they're not trying to say that Lee Anderson was anti-Islam, he was racist. They're saying that they deplore any comments that can be seen as such. They're trying to leave a small way back in for Lee Anderson to the Tory party. But I, for one, I can't really see it. I think others might see he'll get the whip back this week. But I think this is almost turning into what could be a permanent break between Lee Anderson and the party he joined only in 2019 to become an MP.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you, Christopher Hope, our political editor there outside Westminster. Now, we did mention one of the candidates in the Rochdale by-election, so here are the candidates.
Azir Ali, of course. He's suspended by the Labour Party, but amazingly still appearing as Labour on the ballot. This by-election, of course, taking place on Thursday. There's also Mark Coleman, who's standing as an independent, Simon Danchuk for Reform UK, Ian Donaldson, a Liberal Democrat, Paul Ellison, a Conservative.
George Galloway, Workers' Party of Britain, Michael Howarth, Independent, William Howarth, Independent, Guy Otten, Green Party, Raven Roden Subordinate, Official Monster Raving Looney, and David Tully, an Independent.
No, really fascinating, this by-election. It's perhaps one of the most unpredictable by-elections that we've seen in a long, long time. And do you know what, Emily? I'm going to be up all night
you are indeed,
presenting that by-election programme here on GB News.
Well, I'm sleeping sweetly in bed.
I don't know who's got the rougher end of the deal there, to be honest. But,
I don't know. We're going to be bringing you the very latest on everything to do with Lee Anderson and his suspension from the Tory party. But a study also finds that young people are claiming a mental disorder to be out of work more than any other age group. Are they under more stress than everyone else, or are they perhaps more lazy? You're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We're the People's Channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
Marnie says being sexy in business is entirely possible and maybe even better.
Well, Marnie, this is something I say is true. I've had to live with this for quite a long time, and I think you can do both. Now, tell me, it's lovely to see you first of all.
Thank you for having me.
In all your gorgeousness. And you're telling me that often is regarded as something derogatory or something to hold you back. Is that right?
It's just this really unfair thing, this really unfair narrative that women can't do both. Even men can do it. As you know, Eamon, you can do it. You can do it all. And I just think, you know, women are so multifaceted. They can be mothers, they can be sexy, they can be businesswomen, they can be silly, they can be all these different dimensions. And this press push that we have to limit ourselves to one category is just unfair.
But do you think that is where some people may be wrong-footed or go wrong to underestimate you?
Exactly. There is that saying, disarm with charm. So, you know, that there is that idea that people do look at someone who cares about how they look, who's perhaps a bit feminine, and underestimate them. But hopefully I've proved that wasn't the case in the boardroom.
And thank goodness for Karen Brady. She's definitely upped the glam stakes on the show. And if anybody can prove that you can be sexy and successful in business, I suppose it's her, really. But where do you think most of the criticism comes from? Because I have to say, hard to believe, but when I was younger, I certainly got a bit of this at my old employer, being told that I had to dress a certain way, not to be too sexy, which I found hugely
you were told this by women.
I was told this by a female boss who didn't like me wearing zips on the back of my dress. Not just me, but some of the other presenters there. And I took such offence. I felt like she thought that I was some sort of, I don't know what. Do you take offence when people are criticising you that, you know, in some way they think you're, I don't know?
There's just no right answer. And as you said, I think Karen Brady is doing an excellent job at leading the charge that you can be glamorous and get the job done.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 2:25. You're watching and listening to Good Afternoon Britain. Now, a new report says young people are increasingly blaming mental health problems for being jobless. The number of 18 to 24-year-olds who are economically inactive due to health issues has more than doubled in the past decade.
Well, in light of these figures, we're asking, do young people just need to suck it up and get on with it? Well, joining us in the studio is TV presenter and author Tonya Buxton, who thinks that young people need to man up and get into work, and broadcast journalist Judita De Silva, who believes it is necessary to care for one's state of mind.
Well, excellent. We've got two sides of the argument on this one. Tonya, why do young people need to man up? I'm not sure if you can say that anymore. It's not politically correct.
I don't care. As you know, I don't care. What are you allowed to say? I think the reality is that, and I blame parents. I don't just blame the kids. I blame parents. My children have all had chores, whether they like it or not. Parents are now too busy trying to mollycoddle and pander to their children instead of actually setting them up for life. One of the things that we know that children who have had chores in their adolescence actually make happier adults. So this simple fact. So just make your kids do stuff. When they say, I can't be bothered, get them out of bed, make them wash the car. All the things that we had to do when we were young, get them to do it. But I have to add a little caveat to that. Lockdown, not COVID, because COVID didn't affect kids, they were fine. Lockdown has done a lot of damage, and so we do have to do something to make up for the damage we did to these 18 to 24-year-olds during that lockdown period. So I have more sympathy than I would have had we have not had lockdown, but I think we are where we are because of lockdown.
So it's both bad parenting and then also coupled with the impact of lockdown on mental health and things like that. Judita, what's your view?
I think it's like the situation we have now is when the pendulum swings completely in the other direction, because when you look at previous generations, whether it's parents or grandparents, they were kind of, stoicism was the only order on the menu, but then you had a generation that was operating with like a POW level of psycho-emotional trauma that they couldn't articulate. What you've done is given people a vernacular and a vocabulary to talk about how they feel, which is very necessary, particularly young people that are constantly struggling with articulating the growing pains of life. If someone can actually say, I have a problem, the greatest hurdle has been scaled. Now what you have is the degree to which they do that, because you have to be able to temper what is truly a problem or what is just the basic struggles of existing in the world.
One of the problems, though, that they have all the words.
Yeah. Yes.
They can talk about it all the time. And sorry, I'm depressed. Sorry, I've got anxiety. I couldn't possibly go to work. Sometimes they're taking the mick.
It's not that. It's almost like giving a kid too much candy. Don't blame them if they eat it and get on well. It's like
so
the point you said.
Don't have the patience with them.
No, but it's regulation. If you give me access to something, I'm going to try it out. It might not be the best thing for me. What you have to take the responsibility for, which is kind of like good parenting, is, yes, you can talk about how you feel, but you must realise that sometimes when you go to work and they're not nice to you, that's life.
Yeah. And literally, you know, before I would get anxiety going, but I didn't. It wasn't in my head as anxiety. It's called nerves. It's called excitement. It's called all the pressures that you have to do something. You know, I can't take any exams. It makes me too anxious. Well, what are you talking about? That's what exams are there for, to make you worry and stress. Oh, I can't go to that interview. Oh, I can't go and do anything because it makes me too anxious.
And
well, that's part of it.
Anxiety begets anxiety.
Yes.
You get into a sort of spiral about it. Perhaps if there were a more reasoned and moderate conversation in this area, people wouldn't almost be thinking themselves into problems.
I do agree with that, because you have to let someone feel I can speak, but know when it's necessary to speak. And that's when it's the discourse about it. It's introduce the language, but also introduce an understanding of the application of the language. If someone says it's affecting my mental health, simply ask them why and how. If they cannot justify it, then they begin to understand that, oh, maybe this isn't a mental health issue.
But also, is there an issue that a lot of young people have, you know, very strong feelings? So it could be that they're feeling very down about something. They could be feeling quite a lot of anxiety. But then we tell them that they've got a condition. Yes. When actually those are genuine feelings and they come from somewhere. So it might be that they've got a big exam. It might be that they're worried about the future of their life, you know, existential questions. It could be that they're feeling really down and it's persisted. But then we slap on, you know, the label of depression or the label of anxiety, and then it goes from there.
It's exactly that. When I was younger, I was really worried about the nuclear bomb. That was what was in the news at the time. And it was quite oppressive. What we do now in the media is we give so many things for young people to be worried about that are nothing to do with them. But the reality is, when you're growing up, you do get nervous, you do get anxious, so you just have to put your feelings aside and get busy living.
And it's normal to feel that way.
Well, we're going to pause here for a second because we've just heard word from Rishi Sunak after, of course, Keir Starmer has accused him of leading a divided and chaotic party. Let's hear from him.
Well, today we're announcing significant uplift in funding for local areas as a result of the decision that we made on HS2. So £4.7 billion that we are now reallocating across the North and Midlands as promised. And this money is specifically for smaller towns, rural areas. For the first time, are going to be treated like the big cities. They're going to get a huge amount of extra funding, almost 9 times more what they normally receive, and multi-year certainty, and crucially, local people will be in charge of how to invest that money, not someone sitting in Whitehall. So it's an example of levelling up in action. It's us delivering on the plan that we set out, and that is making a huge difference across the North and Midlands.
The words of Lee Anderson, would you regard them as Islamophobic?
Well, I've been very clear that what Lee said was wrong, it was unacceptable, and that's why we suspended the whip. And it's important that everybody, but particularly elected politicians, are careful with their words and do not inflame tensions.
But there's a difference between wrong and Islamophobic. Were they Islamophobic?
Well, I think the most important thing is that the words were wrong. They were ill-judged, they were unacceptable, and that's what I believe, and that's why the whip has been suspended. And I think everyone can see that tensions are already running high, and what I want to do, I think what the country wants to see, is the heat taken out of this debate, and I think that's the right thing to do.
If he were to apologise, would you welcome him back into the party?
Again, look, we literally have just had these comments. As I said, I don't think they're right, they're not acceptable. That's why the whip has been suspended, and that's where we are now.
It's not just him, though, is it? Suella Braverman, for instance, has talked about the Islamists, the extremists and the anti-Semites being in control. This is someone you appointed as Home Secretary. What's going on inside your party?
Well, I think that those comments were not about an individual in particular. There is a broader point that some of the scenes that we have been witnessing on our streets in recent times are unacceptable. And we're now having a situation where, whether it's private MPs' meetings, council meetings, or indeed what happened in Parliament last week, where the normal democratic processes that we are used to in this country are being impacted, threatened, disrupted aggressively and in an intimidating fashion. I don't think that's right. I don't think anyone thinks that that's right. And I think it's important that we call out that kind of behaviour as wrong and that we do everything we can to stamp it out.
Thank you. That's the end of the poll. Thank you very much.
Well, there we have it. We have a distinction there from the Prime Minister, saying Islamists are in control in the abstract, as Suella Braverman did, is apparently fine, but saying that Sadiq Khan is controlled by Islamists is not fine. There's a line being drawn there. Well, we're still joined by our fantastic panel. And Tonya, what did you make of that?
It's gobbledygook language again, isn't it? Ultimately, it's freedom of speech that's being stopped. And I think it's got to do with the fact that Lee Anderson is your working class, kind of doesn't have the right accent, because others before him have said the same thing and not had the whip taken away from them. And the most important thing that we have to guard in Britain and in the West is freedom of speech. We might not like what's being said, but we have to be able to debate what's being said without saying, right, now you're out, because you're not allowed to speak.
But, Juditha, I suppose the issue here is that this was an attack against an individual.
Mm-hmm. I think that what kind of struck me straight away from looking at that is that you can tell he's been in a bunker with his crisis management team. And it's kind of when they tell you don't go near hot-button words. Do not say Islamophobic, do not say homophobic, do not say anti-Semitic. Just hover around it and say, I have taken an action, it was a bad thing.
Word soup.
Basically. And it's like,
right. He's extremely careful.
So
with his
careful.
words.
And that word politics means that he knows, which is why this is the key thing in all governments, particularly here in America. Should he have said Islamophobic, then you open the floodgates for them to police everything that's been said by everyone before to rebrand it again. So he's like, do not open that door.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed, Juditha De Silva and, of course, Tonya Buxton. It's your headlines.
It's 2:34. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Sadiq Khan says comments made by Lee Anderson on GB News were vile, racist, anti-Muslim and Islamophobic. In an editorial published in the Evening Standard this afternoon, the Mayor of London also criticised the Prime Minister for failing to mention anti-Muslim sentiment when he condemned Mr Anderson's comments. The former Tory deputy chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this network when he suggested that Islamists had got control of the Mayor of London. Admitting his words were clumsy, he said that he was intending to highlight what he believes is Mr Khan's failure to tackle pro-Palestine protests. The Prime Minister has refused to describe the comments as Islamophobic, but said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. New investment in transport for the north of England and the Midlands is levelling up in action. That's according to Rishi Sunak. It's after the government outlined plans for the reallocation of funds following the cancellation of HS2's northern leg. The money could be used to expand mass transit systems, refurbish rail and bus stations and repair potholes. It will be up to local councils to allocate the funds. But the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, dismissed the plan, saying the money was already promised 10 years ago. And farmers are on the streets of Brussels this afternoon, setting fire to tyres and blocking streets with their tractors. It's in a protest against cheap supermarket prices. Riot police were seen firing water cannons as EU ministers arrived for meetings on the growing crisis. The farmers are demanding action from the European Union on free trade agreements, which they blame for damaging European farming. It's the latest in a series of similar protests across the bloc, with the EU already moving to weaken some of its green policies. And for the latest story, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Ken, do you find the Union flag, the Union Jack, divisive?
In some situation, but as Simon quite clearly stated, and I agree with everything that he says in regards that there's situation when people use it for ulterior motive to cause fear, alarm and distress. We saw that with the far right when they came up to saying protecting the Churchill statues and things of that nature. But largely on the large whole, even I wave the St George's flag on a sporting occasion, and I don't see anything wrong in raising the Union Jack or the St George's flag, so long as the intention is correct. And as he says, Mr. Brockhurst, he served for the country, and he should have every right to be proud of what he's done and the way that he wants to display it.
All right, Simon, what do you make of this kind of, I would argue it as like student social media-based politics, where you get these pillocks from the Green Party or whatever saying, oh, it's divisive and I can't believe it will be legal in this country to do... Do those people need to get out more? I was on the streets of Stratford earlier on, an incredibly diverse place, speaking to a massive range of people right across different age demographics. I couldn't find a single sausage who said to me that they thought that this guy from the Green Party was right.
He obviously has absolutely no attention from anybody, and this is his way of finding attention. Both Ken and myself, we both agree that nobody should use any symbol of national identity to offend others deliberately, because that's just inflaming a situation. There's so much sensitivity around so many things today, and people do get offended by so much so quickly without any rhyme or reason.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
It's 39 minutes past 2 and we're crossing to our political editor, Christopher Hope, who's got news from Westminster. Chris, what's happening?
Hi, Tom. Hi, Emily. Thanks for having me back on again very briefly. Yes, the number of MPs saying they got no confidence in Speaker Sir Lindsay Hoyle has climbed by 6 to 78 now. 78 signed it, but 77 one withdrew it. So 77 MPs have now said they've got no confidence in Lindsay Hoyle, up by 6. 3 Tory MPs and 3 SNP MPs have signed it. Don't forget, this goes back to last Wednesday, when the Speaker allowed an unusual Second Amendment to an Opposition Day debate, allowing Labour MPs to vote for their policy on Gaza rather than having to support either the government position or the SNP. The MPs signing it today are Stephen Bonner from the SNP, Dr Philippa Whitford from the SNP and Stuart Hosey, all the SNP, and Tory MPs, Rachel Maclean, Vicky Ford, Sally Ann Hart. So the problems have not gone away for the Speaker. They're getting worse. And I was told on Friday that if this number gets towards 97, which is 15% of the whole of the House of Commons in terms of MPs, he'll be in some trouble. So he's got to get all MPs supporting him. If the Speaker loses the confidence of the House, his days are numbered. It's getting worse, not better, for the Speaker.
Thank you very much indeed for that update. Christopher Hope there, our political editor. What do you make of that, then?
Solidly
77?
more than 10% of the House of Commons now no confidence in the chair of the House of Commons.
Why does it have to be 15?
15% is just it's a statistic that is measurable. I don't think there's no special mechanism. There is no mechanism by which you can remove the Speaker. You can sort of do motions of...
20%'s measurable.
That's true. 15 just sounds a lot bigger, doesn't it? 15% of MPs and then something happens. That is a considerable amount. I mean, of course, the distraction of Lee Anderson's comments and then the row over Islamophobia and everything else has taken people's eyes off the future of the Speaker. But there you go, 77 MPs, that number has gone up. I'm thinking 15 might be the percentage under the rules of the 1922 committee, the percentage of Tory MPs needed to call a ballot of no confidence in the leader of the Conservative Party. Of course, that doesn't apply to Parliament as a whole. That only applies to one party. But I suppose you could apply the same principle, that then it becomes difficult at a number like that. But if you imagine 77 members of Parliament, it's bigger than the third largest party. As a group, these would be the third largest party in Parliament by quite a considerable distance.
That's only about 10%, though.
Yeah, it's over 10%. Well, 65 would be 10%.
65
Or actually,
would be 10%.
it wouldn't be 65, because you'd have to discount the Sinn Féin MPs and the Speaker, so it would be, 62 or something.
Well, anyway, councils in the North and the Midlands are to receive billions of pounds to improve their transport services.
Well, £4.7 billion has been saved from scrapping the second leg of HS2, and that's going to be reallocated to the local authorities.
Yes, the Prime Minister says the announcement represented levelling up in action. We're joined by Joe Rukin, who is the founder of Stop HS2. Will this money make up for HS2 not going to plan?
Well, it'll be far more useful to the North and Midlands than HS2 ever would have been. HS2 was all about dragging more economic activity to London. We've said right from the start, if you want to, rebalance the economy or, heal, I should say, the North-South divide, which is what it was 15 years ago they were talking about. You need to spend that money in the North, in the Midlands. You don't need a faster railway line that is going to just drag more economic activity to London. And the thing is that we have said, right from the start, if you want to deliver benefits to people, you have to invest in the transport infrastructure they use every day, in the everyday stuff that will get people in and around the cities and towns in which they live, opposed to pandering to a fast train for fat cats, something that is just going to, drag more people into London and only benefit the richest in society.
The people that were backing HS2 included the Northern Mayor, Andy Burnham. It included, of course, Andy Street as well, the Mayor of the West Midlands. These are people that really do care about their regions and say that it's vital capacity, because currently the connections between Birmingham and Manchester and many else besides just don't have capacity to take the number of people that want to travel between these places.
Well, this is simply not the case. The capacity argument has always been overblown right from the start. And the simple fact is that if you invest in the pinch points, which now Andy Street and Andy Burnham are saying you should do between Manchester and Birmingham, you can deliver capacity at a fraction of the cost on the existing lines. There are several issues wrong with the existing West Coast Main Line that can be addressed very easily. And if you're looking at getting people into into Leeds, into the East Midlands and Yorkshire, then there are very few capacity constraints on the Midland Main Line and the East Coast Main Line. HS2 was all about basically just chucking money at the construction industry, and both Andy Street and Andy Burnham are very heavily lobbied by the construction industry, as indeed are all the mainstream political parties. There's a lot of political donors give money to parties who are from the construction industry, and this has always been about lining their pockets.
And of course they were told this would create huge numbers of jobs and the rest of it, and I guess now the question is, how will these local councils use the money? That's all we've got time for, unfortunately. Joe Rukin, the founder of Stop HS2, he's got his T-shirt on there. Absolutely. Stop HS2. Thank you very much for talking to us. There you go. It is up to now the local councils to spend the money in local people's interests.
I think it's a disgrace that HS2 reached, over £100 billion. But originally it was only meant to cost just over 20 billion, between 20 and 30 billion.
Yeah.
But then what happened was the government kept changing the plan, kept putting more of it in tunnels and cuttings and nature reserves and cycle tracks and all the rest of it, all alongside badger tunnels, just everything that you could possibly add to make this thing the most expensive railway per mile than just about anything else in the world.
And they cut down beautiful historic trees, didn't they? But coming up, we're going to get your views on the whole Lee Anderson Islamophobia row, as the Labour leader Keir Starmer says the Prime Minister is leading a divided and chaotic party. That's what Keir Starmer has to say.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall? Let's find out together. For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
Welcome to the show. Superb stuff, great footage. So you're right in the thick of it there. What's the mood on the ground?
Well, I've left there now. I've actually now come to that EU Council summit that I was talking about. It's still pretty chaotic. The entire city of Brussels has been completely clogged with these tractors, sort of three abreast in most of the roads across the city. The people of Brussels aren't particularly happy. I mean, this is sort of reminiscent for some people of the Just Stop Oil protests, you know, people gluing themselves. People are unable to get to hospital appointments, and there's a lot of upset about the destruction that's happening on the streets of Brussels today. But on the other side, there's also the protests, which the farmers are saying that EU green laws simply are not able to fit with what they need to do to keep their businesses going. And just before the protests happened, we saw the European Commission actually make some concessions to the farmers' protests. And this is on the demands that were put on them to set aside somewhere in the region of 5% of their land for regrowing for biodiversity. A lot of the farmers have said that's not possible, and the European Commission has said that they can delay that coming in. So they have won a small concession with these protests.
And Jack, there's a feeling as well, a huge dissatisfaction that the European Union has managed to find 50 billion euros in aid to send to Ukraine, and yet farmers in particular are on the receiving end of net zero targets, taxation on diesel, and endless red tape. So many farmers, Jack, saying they're measuring ditches to see if they have to drain them or not. There are minimum requirements on the width of battery hen enclosures. Endless red tape, as Jeremy Clarkson pointed out in Clarkson's farm in Britain. They've simply had enough, and they're shouting, Ursula von der Leyen, we are here.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 minutes to 3, and there were shocking scenes in Bradford over the weekend as a violent brawl erupted outside a kebab shop, with pro-Palestine protesters demanding the owner boycott Coca-Cola.
Yes, the footage, which surfaced on Snapchat late last night, shows a group of more than 50 people engaging in a violent altercation, of course, amid the ongoing tensions in Gaza. So 4 men there you can see with the batons as sticks or something, with the flag there too. This is all 4 men have since been arrested for this. Now, this shop owner was targeted because he's selling Coca-Cola. Now, some pro-Palestine protesters are demanding that everyone boycott Coca-Cola on the grounds that it's sold in occupied territories, or it's sold in the state of Israel.
Well, I'm reading this is an age-old conflict, the Coca-Cola Arab conflict, which apparently began in 1967 because Coca-Cola company built a bottling plant in Israel, and that kicked all of this off.
And this
is extraordinary.
I mean, and this is an example of how the pro-Palestine cause can erupt into mob-like anger. These people are targeting this shop owner simply because he wants to sell Coca-Cola in his shop. He may not have even been aware of the calls to boycott Coca-Cola. I mean, we've seen people protesting outside M&S, we've seen people protesting outside McDonald's. You had McDonald's having to have police outside McDonald's because, again, pro-Palestine protesters are saying that they have to be boycotted.
And there's so much fake news and, frankly, political mischief around this. I'm on the Coca-Cola company website here, where they have a whole FAQ. Does Coca-Cola send its profits to the Israeli army? The answer, of course, no. Coca-Cola does not fund military operations in any country. They have to have this on their website now because of the amount of fake news that has spread around this company.
And this is the problem with social media as well, and the way it's being used with regards to this conflict in particular. What you have is people whipping up these boycotts against companies, often based on spurious
and, frankly, untrue grounds.
And then what do you see in Bradford? Yeah. Groups of men targeting a shopkeeper because he's selling Coca-Cola. I mean, it's one of the most popular brands ever.
It's outrageous and intimidating and, frankly, baffling because you have so many shops. I mean, I can't think of a single shop in this country that doesn't sell Coca-Cola, quite frankly.
I mean, our politicians should be addressing this. I mean, the people living in that area must be absolutely terrified to see that outside their high street, just outside a random kebab shop, to be targeting this way, waving flags around, hitting each other with sticks. I mean, it's absolutely barbaric.
Yes, and we don't want to be seeing this sort of street violence on the streets of the United Kingdom. It seems like there's violence that is happening here that didn't used to happen here.
Yeah, so he's being threatened to stop selling Coca-Cola. I mean, the mind boggles, really. If I saw that outside my window, I'd be absolutely terrified, horrified.
But a lot of you have been getting in touch on our main story of today, which, of course, is about the comments of Lee Anderson, the former deputy chair of the Conservative Party, who has had the whip suspended from him. And Natasha has got in touch to say Lee Anderson should have every right to voice his opinion through free speech, thus should not be sanctioned in any way. Although I don't think there's anyone saying that there should be sort of legal repercussions. There's an internal Conservative Party repercussion.
And Peter says, I don't often agree with Peter Tatchell. Peter Tatchell, we spoke to earlier about this, but on this I agree with him. Some people are genuinely afraid of this ideology and the extremist tracks. Well, this is the thing. Should you be able to criticise a religion, any religion, in any way, really, without being accused of Islamophobia? Should there be a different definition? I mean, attacking and assaulting Muslims on the basis of their religion is already very much against
and this is the fundamental difference. It should be absolutely fine to attack ideas, philosophies, religions, but not to attack individuals, and perhaps that's where Lee Anderson crossed the line. But it's up next, it's Martin Daubney. What's coming up on your show, Martin?
Hi guys, fantastic show. Yeah, I'll have all the latest on the Lee Anderson fiasco. Kicked off on my show Friday, 5 o'clock. I spoke to the guy very shortly ago. He was in the studio. Would he apologise? Should he stay or should he go? Should Rishi have him back? Is the red wall dead without him? Plus, we'll have an exclusive interview with a councillor whose meeting was stormed in Stoke by pro-Palestinian protesters. He'll share his terrifying ordeal. All that come in, but first, here's your latest weather forecast.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to your latest GB News weather update with me, Annie, from the Met Office. It should be staying dry for many areas through the rest of the day, with some late sunshine to come. However, it will be a cold night tonight. That's as high pressure is building in from the south and west, so that will settle things down through the rest of the night. However, in the north and west, we'll start to see some thicker cloud and rain arrive by tomorrow morning. So the winds should ease tonight, allowing for temperatures to dip down quite early on, and we should see some mist and fog developing mainly across central and southeastern areas. That could be quite slow to clear tomorrow morning. But away from any mist and fog, it will turn frosty, particularly for inland areas of Wales, England, northern England as well. Further north and west, though, we'll see some wet weather arrive by tomorrow morning. Quite a blustery band of rain will push through around rush hour for northwestern areas of Scotland and into Northern Ireland too. That could bring some snow to the high ground of Scotland, and then that rain will push into parts of northern England and parts of Wales as well to bring a wet afternoon for these areas. Further south and east, though, it should stay dry, but it will be a much cloudier day than today, and temperatures around average for the time of year, 7 or 8 degrees. Through Wednesday, we'll see another probably misty and murky start to the day before we see the next batch of rain arrive from the west, but this time this will pick up the temperatures. It will turn milder through the course of Wednesday and into Thursday, with further rain arriving into parts of the north and west. It looks a little bit colder to end the week again, though. See you later.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from from 9:30.
Are you across this microaggression story?
I'm across microaggressions. I'm also across XL bullies.
You would not last 5 minutes.
Oh, for God's
So
sake,
basically-
civil servants, give me strength.
So civil servants have been taught not to roll their eyes. Something you do very well. We both do it quite a lot, actually.
Because it's seen as an act of microaggression. This, by the way, this costs the taxpayer, this
Yes?
training, £160,000. What the hell is going on in our woke civil service? Who cares if someone rolls their eyes in exasperation?
What the hell is going on in our civil service, full stop, if the way that civil servants are communicating with each other is rolling their eyes and looking at their phones? I mean, is the government being run by people who are essentially acting to each other like stroppy teenagers?
Yeah.
But I'm all right with people, because, you see, I would be in defence of eye rolling.
So me too, I couldn't care less.
But do you know why? Because I want people to give me their genuine reaction, as long as it's not deeply offensive. But I want to know how people feel. And what they're being told here, civil servants are being taught, and of course this is an area of employment law, because people are taking cases against their bosses who roll their eyes at them. They're saying they're being encouraged to say nothing and nod their heads to promote transparency and inclusion. Don't show what you really think, just nod your head.
But I think that comes with then saying what you really think, and this is the key problem, and what these courses are trying to establish. And I looked into some of them when I was researching this, and it's not saying hide what you're feeling. It's saying, rather than huffing and puffing and rolling your eyes, if you've got a disagreement with someone, say I've got a disagreement with someone. Because otherwise, you can't have an effective workplace if people are sort of just passively, aggressively huffing at each other.
Why do these civil servants need to be taught this? Why do people need to be taught this? This is just normal discourse in a normal working day. You don't need a seminar on it.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and a very happy Monday to you. It's 3 p.m. Welcome to the Martin Dudley Show on GB News, broadcasting live from the heart of Westminster, all across the UK today. Lee Anderson fights back. The Islamophobia row at the heart of the Conservative Party hots up as it kicked off on this show on 5 o'clock on Friday, as you recall. And the party's former deputy chairman releases a statement defending himself and attacking Sadiq Khan's record. The London mayor has hit back, and the Labour leader has now waded into the row. Sir Keir Starmer. It's all kicking off. We'll bring you all of the latest details and the inside lines from the heart of Westminster. And as Rishi Sunak condemns his words as wrong, what impact will Lee Anderson's comments have on how voters view the Tories as we head towards that all-important general election? Should he apologise? Will the Red Wall forgive him if he did it? We'll have all of the analysis. And coming up next, is Rayner a hypocrite? As Keir Starmer pledges to build a patriotic economy, his deputy, Angela Rayner, is under fire for allegedly making a tidy profit on a council house from Right to Buy, a scheme she now wants to abolish, of course. One of Maggie Thatcher's flagship schemes. Is this a classic case of socialist double standards? And it's the Prince versus the President. That's right, Donald Trump says there'll be no easy rides for Prince Harry's legal immigration status if he returns to the White House. Will the Donalds send Harry packing? We've got so much coming up on the show, and that's all coming in your next hour. Thank you for joining me on the show today. Your company, as ever, is hugely appreciated. Well, it certainly kicked off Friday, 5 o'clock on this show. Those comments Lee Anderson made have reverberated now for 72 straight hours. Should he stay? Should he go? Should Rishi Sunak take him back? Is the Tories' credibility finally had its final coffin nail if they don't take him back? And do you think he should apologise? Should he say sorry? Or, if you say sorry, would that always be thrown back in your face? And later in the show, an exclusive interview with a Stoke councillor whose meeting was stormed by pro-Palestinian protesters. They called them baby killers. We'll have an exclusive interview on that terrifying ordeal coming up in the show. Get in touch all the usual ways, especially your comments on Lee Anderson. gbviews@gbnews.com. Right, let's get kicking off. But first, it's your latest news headlines with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 3. I'm Sophia Wensler in the GB newsroom. Your top story this hour. The Prime Minister has refused to describe Lee Anderson's comments as Islamophobic after he said this morning that they were unacceptable and wrong. The former Tory Deputy Chairman released a statement this morning aimed at clarifying remarks he made on this